Every satisfying cruelty hides a coward's fingerprint. When you watch the Alpha King of Ashenvale strip his queen of everything she ever earned, remember this. Thrones don't betray people. People betray people, and then blame the crown. This story is about the woman they tried to erase, the mother they never saw coming, the queen who turned exile into empire. Stay with me until the very end. Drop a like if this story grabs you by the throat, and comment the name of your city. I want to know where my people are watching from tonight. Let's begin. The throne room of the Palace of Moons had never felt colder. 300 courtiers lined the obsidian hall in perfect rows, their silver cloaks pressed and their mouths shut. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across their faces, and not one of them dared blink. Above the assembly, banners of silver wolves hung from iron beams, their embroidered eyes staring down at the scene below, like ancestors forced to witness the unraveling of everything they built. Queen Elyra Nightbane stood at the center of that hall. No chains on her wrists. They had not bothered with chains. The absence of restraint said more than iron ever could. It said she was already nothing. It said whatever verdict came next was a formality, because the decision had been carved into stone long before she walked through those doors. There is a particular cruelty in being condemned without being charged. The mind cannot fight what the mouth cannot name. And so Elyra stood there, spine straight, jaw locked, hands folded in front of her body, as if she were attending a diplomatic dinner instead of her own execution. Her wolf stirred beneath the surface of her skin. Not in rage, in recognition. The animal understood what the woman had not yet accepted, that the man on the throne had already decided, that every word spoken from this point forward was theater designed for the crowd, not for truth. Alpha King Valor Drukhar sat above her on a throne carved from the bones of the first wolf who ever ruled Ashenvale. His golden eyes caught the chandelier light and threw it back like a warning. He was beautiful, the way a blade is beautiful, precise, lethal, crafted for a single purpose. His jaw was set. His fingers gripped the armrest so hard the ancient bone creaked. He did not look at her. That was the first wound. Not the accusations, not the sentence, the refusal to look. High Regent Malric stood 3 steps below the throne, his black robes pooling around his boots like spilled ink. He held a scroll in both hands, the kind of scroll that changes kingdoms. His voice cut through the hall like a surgeon's knife, clean and practiced and utterly devoid of mercy. The crown charges Queen Elyra Nightbane with 3 offenses against the Sacred Alpha line, Malric said. He paused. Let the silence do its work. First, willful failure to produce an heir within the mandated 5-year covenant. Second, conspiracy with agents of the Thornwall Kingdom to undermine the succession. Third, high treason against the sovereign authority of Ashenvale. The hall did not gasp. Gasps require surprise, and surprise requires ignorance. Every wolf in that room had been fed these accusations in whispers for months. The poison had been administered slowly, precisely, in drawing rooms and hunting lodges and late-night council meetings where Elyra's name was repeated so many times in the context of failure that it became a synonym for it. Elyra's eyes moved from Malric to the throne. Vialor. One word. His name. Not his title. Not the formal address protocol demanded by court law. His name, spoken the way a wife speaks to a husband when the doors are closed and the masks come off. The hall flinched. You will address the Alpha King by his proper title, Malric snapped. Valor, she said again, louder this time. Look at me. The king's jaw shifted. A muscle in his neck twitched. His golden eyes stayed fixed on a point somewhere above her head, somewhere safe, somewhere that did not require him to see what 5 years of marriage looked like when it stood accused of crimes it did not commit. I am looking at you, Sa, he said. No, you are looking past me. You have been looking past me for 6 months. This is not the forum for personal grievances, Elyra. Personal grievances. She let those 2 words hang in the air like smoke. Is that what we are calling this? You are stripping me of my crown, my title, my name, and my home. You are doing it in front of 300 wolves who ate at my table last winter solstice, and you call my objection a personal grievance. Malric stepped forward. The accused will confine her remarks to the charges presented. I was not speaking to you, Malric. You will address the High Regent with respect. Respect is earned. You taught me that, Valor. First year of our marriage. You said a title without substance is just noise. So tell me, what substance stands behind these charges? The silence that followed was the kind that makes cowards shift their weight. Elyra watched it ripple through the court. The small movements, the downcast eyes, the wolves who suddenly found the floor fascinating. She cataloged every face, every averted gaze, every throat that swallowed hard. A woman learns her enemies not in battle, but in silence. The ones who refuse to meet your eyes when you are drowning are the same ones who held you under. Valor finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, stripped of everything except authority. The evidence has been reviewed by the Crown Council. Intercepted communications between your personal courier and agents in Thornwall. Financial transfers traced to accounts bearing your family's seal. Medical testimony confirming your inability to carry the Alpha Bloodline. Medical testimony from whom? Royal physician Aldros. Aldros has not examined me in 8 months. His records indicate otherwise. His records are lies, Malric's voice sliced in. The accused does not possess the authority to challenge the findings of the royal physician. Elyra turned to face him fully. She was smaller than Malric by a full head, but something in the way she stood made the height difference irrelevant. There is a kind of stillness that predators recognize. The absolute calm of a creature that has stopped calculating escape and started calculating damage. You are very eager to keep me from speaking, Malric. A man confident in his evidence does not fear questions. I fear nothing. Then answer me this. Who ordered the interception of my courier's correspondence? That information is classified under Crown security protocols. Who authorized the financial audit of my family's accounts? Crown security. And who chairs the Crown Security Council? The pause lasted exactly 2 heartbeats. Elyra counted them. I do, Malric said. So the man who gathered the evidence, reviewed the evidence, and is now presenting the evidence is the same man. And no one in this hall finds that worth questioning. She turned to face the court. 300 wolves. 300 silent, complicit, terrified wolves. Does anyone here have a question? Anyone? You are watching your queen be condemned on the testimony of a single man who investigated, judged, and sentenced without oversight. This is not justice. This is choreography. Nobody spoke. The weight of institutional cowardice is heavier than any chain. It does not clank or rust. It simply sits on the shoulders of every person in the room who knows the truth and chooses comfort over courage. Elyra felt it then, not as anger, but as clarity. The terrible, liberating clarity of understanding that she was alone. That the system she had trusted, the court she had served, the wolves she had fed and protected and celebrated, would stand in perfect rows and watch her be destroyed rather than risk a single whisper of dissent. This is what betrayal actually looks like. Not a knife in the dark, not a dramatic reveal. It looks like silence. It looks like 300 people who know the truth and choose to say nothing. Valor stood. The hall went rigid. Elyra Nightbane, he said. His voice carried the formal cadence of royal decree, the tone that transforms words into law. By the authority vested in me as Alpha King of Ashenvale, guardian of the Sacred Alpha line, and sovereign protector of the Wolf Realm, I hereby strip you of the title of Queen. Your bond to the royal house is dissolved. Your name is struck from the records of the Palace of Moons. Each sentence landed like a hammer blow on cold iron. Elyra absorbed them without flinching. She had trained herself for this moment over 6 months of watching the noose tighten, 6 months of intercepted letters and whispered accusations and doors that slowly closed in rooms where she used to be welcomed. You are sentenced to exile beyond the frozen wastes. You are forbidden from entering the borders of Ashenvale under penalty of death. This decree is effective immediately and carries the weight of permanent law. Valor. Guards. Valor, I am carrying your children. The words left her mouth before strategy could stop them. They were not planned. They were the raw, desperate, animal truth of a woman who had held the secret like a live coal against her chest for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and realizing in the span of a single heartbeat that there would never be a right moment. That the man she loved had already chosen the lie over the truth, and this was her last breath of air before the water closed over her head. The hall froze. Violor's golden eyes finally met hers. For one fraction of a second, something cracked behind them, something old and deep and terrified. Then Malric was at his side, a hand on the king's forearm, a voice low enough that only Vaelor could hear. She is desperate. This is a manipulation tactic. Aldros confirmed her Baron status 3 months ago. Do not let sentiment override evidence. Vaelor's jaw tightened, the cracks sealed. The golden eyes went flat. Remove her. Vaelor, listen to me. 3 weeks. I have known for 3 weeks. I did not tell you because I did not trust your court. I was right not to trust them. Look at what they are doing. Remove her now. 2 guards stepped forward. Their hands closed around Elyra's arms. Not rough, not gentle, just the practiced grip of men following orders they did not question. She did not struggle. Struggling would have given them a performance. Instead, she planted her feet and spoke one final time, her voice carrying to every corner of the obsidian hall. You are making the worst mistake of your life, Vaelor Drakkar. Not because you are losing me, because you are losing them. And when you finally understand what you destroyed tonight, the regret will eat you alive. I promise you that. They dragged her backward. Her boots scraped against the polished floor. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling like a dying animal's cry. Malric watched her go. His face was stone. But beneath the stone, behind the careful mask he had spent decades perfecting, something pulsed. Not guilt. Satisfaction. The cold, calculated satisfaction of a man who had just removed the only obstacle between himself and absolute control of the succession. The doors of the throne room closed behind Elyra Nightbane with a sound that would echo through Ashenvale's history for generations. And the kingdom celebrated. They actually celebrated. Banners changed. Toasts were raised. Courtiers who had kissed Elyra's hand at breakfast raised glasses to her exile by dinner. The speed of their reversal was not surprising. Loyalty in a court is a performance, not a principle. It flows toward power the way water flows downhill, effortlessly, mindlessly, and without any memory of where it came from. The celebration told Elyra everything she needed to know about the world she was leaving, and the absence of grief told her everything she needed to know about the man she had married. Outside the palace walls, snow had already begun to fall. The guards escorted her through the eastern gate, the servants' entrance, not the royal arch, a final indignity designed to remind her that she was no longer worth the dignity of a proper exit. They gave her a horse, a thin wool cloak, and a leather satchel containing bread, dried meat, and a water skin. No gold, no weapons, no map. Guard Captain Theron walked beside her to the gate. He was the only one who would not meet her eyes, but for a different reason than the courtiers. His shame was genuine. His silence was not compliance. It was the silence of a man who understood exactly what was happening and lacked the power to stop it. At the gate, he spoke without looking at her. The northern pass is still open for another week. After that, snow will seal it until spring. I know. There are settlements beyond the wastes, small, independent. They do not answer to Ashenvale. I know that too, Theron. He paused. Then, quietly, I am sorry, my queen. Do not call me that. Not because I reject the title, because using it here, where they can hear you, will cost you your head. And you are one of the few decent people left in this kingdom. I need you alive. He nodded, said nothing more, stepped back as she mounted the horse. Elyra rode north. The city fell away behind her in stages. First the palace spires, then the merchant quarters, then the outer walls, then the farmlands that spread like a brown quilt across the valley floor. She did not look back. Looking back is for people who believe they might return to what they lost. Elyra understood, with the bone-deep certainty of a wolf who has been cast out of the pack, that the world behind her was already gone. It existed now only as memory, and memory is the cruelest companion a survivor can carry. She rode for 3 days before the frozen wastes swallowed the last trace of Ashenvale's territory. The wastes were not a place. They were a punishment. Miles of white nothing stretching in every direction, broken only by black rock formations that jutted from the ice like the ribs of a buried giant. Wind cut through her cloak like it was made of paper. The horse stumbled, recovered, stumbled again. Its breath came in clouds that froze on its muzzle. On the 4th night, she found shelter in a shallow cave carved into a cliff face. She built a fire from dead scrub brush, and sat with her back against cold stone and her hands pressed flat against her stomach. 3 heartbeats. She could feel them if she concentrated. 3 tiny pulses of life buried deep inside a body that the most powerful kingdom in the known world had declared barren. "I do not know who you are yet," she said to the darkness. "I do not know what you will become, but I know this. You will never grow up believing that your worth depends on someone else's approval. You will never kneel to a man who does not deserve it, and you will never ever be told that you are nothing." Survival is not heroism. It is not a grand declaration or a dramatic stand. It is the small, ugly, repetitive act of choosing to continue when every rational calculation says to stop. It is building a fire when your hands are too numb to feel the flint. It is eating frozen bread when your stomach has forgotten what warmth tastes like. It is talking to 3 unborn children in the dark because the sound of your own voice is the only proof that you still exist. The horse died on the 6th day. She found it in the morning, frozen solid, still standing because the ice had locked its legs in place before the body collapsed. She took what she could from the saddlebags, cut strips of meat from its flank with a jagged rock, and kept walking. For 2 more days she walked. The landscape shifted on the 8th day. Black rock gave way to dark forest. The temperature rose by degrees, still brutal, still punishing, but survivable. She heard running water somewhere ahead and followed the sound like a prayer she could not speak. The settlement appeared between the trees like something from a fever dream. 20 structures, maybe 30, built from rough-hewn timber and packed earth, clustered around a central well. Smoke rose from half the chimneys. Wolves moved between buildings. Not the polished, court-bred wolves of Ashenvale, but thicker, rougher animals with scars on their muzzles and suspicion in their eyes. A woman stepped out from the nearest building. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair pulled back from a face that looked like it had been carved by weather and hardship. She carried an axe in one hand, not raised, not threatening, just present. The way a frontier woman carries a tool that serves as both instrument and argument. "You look like death warmed over and spat back out," the woman said. Elyra's legs gave out. She hit the frozen ground on both knees, and the impact sent a shock of pain through her body that she barely registered. "I need help." "Obviously. Question is whether you are worth helping." "I am pregnant." The woman's expression did not soften. It shifted. The hardness remained, but something behind it recalibrated. The way a predator reassesses a situation when new information changes the equation. "How far along?" 3 weeks? Maybe 4. "Singles? Triplets?" The woman's eyebrows rose. She looked at Elyra for a long moment, reading her the way a tracker reads terrain. Footprints, pressure points, the story told by what is present and what is missing. She noted the quality of Elyra's boots beneath the mud, the cut of her cloak despite the damage, the way she held herself even on her knees, not collapsed, but kneeling. There is a difference. You are running from something. "I was exiled." "By whom?" "By my husband, the Alpha King of Ashenvale." The woman let out a low whistle. Not impressed, amused. The dark amusement of someone who has lived long enough outside the reach of kingdoms to find their politics absurd. "Ashenvale, the ones with the silver banners and the pretty wolves who have never tasted actual winter. Those are the ones. And your king threw you out while you were carrying his pups. He does not know." "He does not know, or he does not care?" Elyra looked up at the woman. Snow clung to her eyelashes. Her lips were cracked. Her hands were raw and bleeding from days of gripping frozen rock and dead brush. "Both," she said. The woman studied her for another 5 seconds. Then she drove the axe into a stump beside the door, reached down, and hauled Elyra to her feet with one arm. "My name is Haldra. I run this settlement. We do not bow to Ashenvale. We do not bow to anyone. You eat what you earn, you fight when the settlement needs fighting, and you keep your royal problems to yourself until you trust the right people with them." "I understand." "One more thing." "What?" "You are carrying 3 children in the dead of northern winter with no food, no shelter, and no pack. That makes you either the bravest woman I have met or the stupidest. Either way, I respect the hell out of it. Come inside before you freeze to death." The interior of Haldra's lodge was rough but warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth at the center. Pelts covered the floor and the sleeping platforms that lined the walls. The smell was smoke, pine resin, and the sharp musk of wolves living close together. Haldra sat Elyra beside the fire and put a bowl of stew in her hands. It was thick, dark, heavily salted, the kind of food that frontier people cook when calories matter more than flavor. Eat slow. Your body has been burning itself for days. Hit it with too much too fast and it will reject everything. Elyra ate. The warmth spread through her chest like a second heartbeat. How many people live here? She asked between bites. 63. Wolves, mostly. Some half-bloods. A few humans who wandered north and decided they preferred honest cold over dishonest courts. Do you get trouble from the southern kingdoms? Not anymore. We did, early on. Ashenvale sent a patrol about 8 years ago to claim taxation rights over the northern settlements. We sent the patrol back missing 3 members and a lot of confidence. They have not returned. There is a species of strength that the powerful never recognize because it does not announce itself. It does not wear silver or sit on thrones or deliver speeches in obsidian halls. It chops wood. It builds walls. It feeds its people through winters that would kill a courtier in 3 days. And when the powerful come to claim ownership of what they did not build, this quiet strength meets them at the tree line with an axe and a willingness to use it. Haldra was that kind of strong. And Elyra recognized it immediately because she was becoming that kind of strong herself. Stripped of title, stripped of name, stripped of every external marker of value, discovering that what remained after everything was taken was not weakness, but bedrock. I need to ask you something, Elyra said. Ask. If Ashenvale ever comes looking for me, will you hand me over? Haldra laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one. The kind that comes from the belly and has teeth in it. Girl, I have been living beyond the frozen wastes for 22 years because a southern kingdom decided I was inconvenient. If every exile who landed on my doorstep got shipped back, I would have nobody left to share a drink with. You are safe here, as long as you earn your keep. I will. We will see. Months passed. Elyra learned what survival looked like without the cushion of palace walls. She learned to chop wood in sub-zero temperatures, her breath crystallizing in front of her face, while her shoulders screamed from muscles she never knew she had. She learned to dress kills brought in by the settlement's hunting parties. The wet, red, ugly work of feeding a community through winter. She learned to repair roofing during ice storms, fingers numb and bleeding while wind tried to tear her off the ladder. Her body changed. The softness of court life burned away week by week. Her hands developed calluses thick enough to grip a frozen axe handle without flinching. Her shoulders broadened. The aristocratic pallor that marked southern nobles was replaced by weather-darkened skin and the kind of lean muscle that comes from labor, not training. And through all of it, the triplets grew. The settlement healer, an old wolf named Marin, with one eye and hands that could feel a heartbeat through 6 inches of fur, monitored Elyra's pregnancy with the brusque efficiency of someone who had delivered 200 pups in conditions that would horrify a palace physician. 3, Marin said one evening, pressing her palm flat against Elyra's swollen belly. 3 strong ones. I can feel them jockeying for position already. Competitive from the womb. Must get that from their father. Their father is not part of this discussion. Their father is a fool who threw away the best thing that ever happened to his bloodline. But fools can still produce strong children. Biology does not care about character. Elyra said nothing. She stared at the ceiling of Marin's hut and felt the 3 heartbeats pulsing against the old healer's palm and thought about a throne room full of silent wolves and a king who refused to look at her. Regret is a luxury that survivors cannot afford. It lives in the past, and the past is a country with closed borders. Elyra had learned, over months of hauling water and splitting wood and sleeping on packed earth, that the only direction worth facing was forward. Behind her was a palace full of liars. Ahead of her were 3 children who would need a mother strong enough to build them a world. She chose the children. Every single day, she chose the children. Meanwhile, 800 miles to the south, the kingdom of Ashenvale was learning what it felt like to bleed from the inside. The first signs were subtle. Crops that had always thrived in the fertile valleys began producing stunted yields. Livestock grew thin. Wolves in the outer provinces reported a strange fatigue, a heaviness in the bones that no amount of rest could cure. In the Palace of Moons, the court physicians blamed weather patterns. Malric blamed mismanagement by regional governors. Voilor blamed nothing, because Vailor had stopped speaking to anyone who was not required for immediate governance. The king had retreated into a silence that his court mistook for strength. It was not strength. It was the silence of a man who had begun to suspect, in the darkest hours between midnight and dawn, that he had made an irreversible mistake, that the evidence he had accepted was too clean, that the conviction had been too smooth, that the woman who stood before him and said, "I am carrying your children," had not been lying. Because the truth is simple, and it cuts without mercy. A man who truly believed his wife was guilty would feel righteous anger. A man who suspected she was innocent would feel exactly what Vailor felt. A spreading numbness that started in the chest and worked outward until the entire world felt like it was happening behind thick glass. He began reviewing the evidence at night, alone, in his private study. The intercepted letters, the financial records, the medical testimony. He read them with the desperate attention of a man searching for proof that he was right, and instead found, page by page, the fingerprints of a conspiracy so elegant it almost deserved admiration. The courier whose letters had been intercepted had been hired by the Crown Security Office. The financial accounts bearing Elyra's family seal had been opened 3 weeks before the investigation began, by a clerk who answered directly to Malric's office. And royal physician Aldros, who had testified to Elyra's barrenness, had received a land grant in the western provinces 2 days after providing his diagnosis. Every thread led back to the same source. Every lie was signed by the same invisible hand. Vailor sat in the lamplight and felt the ground shift beneath his throne. A king who discovers he has been manipulated faces a choice that defines his legacy. He can admit the truth and accept the catastrophic consequences of his own failure. Or he can bury the discovery and continue ruling on a foundation of lies, hoping the structure holds long enough for history to forget. Most kings choose burial. It is easier, it is safer, it preserves the illusion of infallibility that power requires. Vailor chose neither. He chose the most dangerous option available to a man in his position. He chose to investigate in silence. He told no one what he had found. He continued attending court, signing decrees, meeting with generals and diplomats and trade ministers. He performed the role of Alpha King with mechanical precision, while his private hours were consumed by a systematic dismantling of every piece of evidence that had condemned his wife. It took 3 months. By the end, he had enough proof to execute Malric 10 times over. Fabricated documents, bribed witnesses. A coordinated campaign of character assassination that had begun 2 years before the trial, seeding doubt about Elyra's loyalty in every corner of the court. But proof was not enough. Malric's influence ran deep through the military, the treasury, the regional governors, the trade guilds. Removing him required more than evidence. It required a power base that Vailor did not yet possess, because Malric had spent years ensuring that the king's authority depended on structures that Malric himself controlled. The trap was elegant. The king sat on the throne, but the throne sat on Malric's floor, and Elyra was gone. Vailor stood at the window of his private chambers and stared north. The frozen wastes began where the mountains ended, a white void that swallowed everything. Sound, light, hope, footprints. Somewhere beyond that void, the woman he had exiled was either alive or dead. He did not know which. He was not sure which answer would hurt less. Guilt does not arrive all at once. It builds. It accumulates in the muscles like lactic acid after a long run. It settles into the joints, it makes the body heavy and the mind sharp in all the wrong directions. A guilty man does not need enemies. His own memory is sufficient punishment. Vailor pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. What have I done? The question had no audience. The room was empty. The palace was full of people, and the king was utterly alone. That is the architecture of power. It fills a man's world with bodies and empties it of souls. 700 miles north, in a timber lodge built against the side of a mountain, Elyra screamed. The labor lasted 14 hours. Marin delivered the first child. A boy, dark-haired, golden-eyed, howling before his body fully left the womb. She handed him to Haldra and turned back to Elyra. 1 down, 2 to go. Breathe. I am breathing. You are holding your breath and calling it breathing. Actually breathe. Deep. Through the belly. Your body knows what to do. Stop fighting it. The second child came 40 minutes later. Another boy, lighter-haired, quieter, with eyes that opened immediately and scanned the room with an alertness that made Marin's one good eye widen. "This one is watching," Marin muttered, born 5 minutes and already taking inventory. The third child took an hour. A girl, small but fierce, with lungs that filled the entire lodge with sound the moment she drew her first breath. "Well," Haldra said, holding 2 infants while Marin cleaned the third, "you were not exaggerating." Elyra lay on the sleeping platform, drenched in sweat, every muscle in her body shaking with exhaustion. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her lips were white. Her hands trembled as Marin placed the third child against her chest. 3 children. 3 heartbeats pressed against her own. 3 lives that an entire kingdom had declared impossible. "Kaelin," she said, touching the dark-haired boy. "Orion," the quiet one with the watchful eyes. "Celine," the girl who screamed like a war cry. "Good names," Haldra said. "Strong. They will need strong names where we live. They will need more than names. They will have more. They have you." Elyra looked at the woman who had taken in a frozen exile without question, who had fed her and housed her and never once asked for anything except honest labor in return. "Why did you help me, Haldra? The truth." Haldra set the 2 infants down on the pelts beside Elyra and straightened her back. Her face carried every year of her 50 winters. The scars, the sun damage, the permanent squint of someone who has spent decades reading weather and terrain and the intentions of strangers. Because 22 years ago, I was you, different kingdom, different king, same lie. I was a commander in the Iron Ridge Army, best strategist they had, won 3 campaigns before I turned 30. Then a man who wanted my position told the right lies to the right people, and I was exiled for treason I never committed. I walked north because north was the only direction that did not have someone waiting to kill me. Found this place, built it, filled it with other people the world threw away. She paused, looked at the 3 infants. This settlement exists because the powerful are stupid enough to discard the people they need most. Your king just made the same mistake every king makes. He confused obedience with loyalty and punished the one person who gave him the truth. There is a pattern in history that repeats so often it should be considered law. Power creates systems. Systems create hierarchies. Hierarchies reward those who serve the system and destroy those who challenge it. The challengers are exiled, imprisoned, executed. And then, when the system begins to fail, the powerful discover that the challengers were the only ones with the skills and the courage to fix it. By then, it is usually too late. Ashenvale was approaching that threshold. The kingdom did not know it yet. The crops were still producing, though less each season. The wolves were still strong, though slower each year. The borders were still secure, though the neighboring kingdoms had begun testing them with increasing confidence. The rot was patient. It worked from the inside, the way all true decay works. And at its center sat Malric, growing his influence while the king he served crumbled under the weight of a guilt he could not confess and a mistake he could not fix. In the north, Elyra nursed 3 infants and stared at the stars through a gap in the roof timbers and felt, for the first time in months, something that was not grief or rage or exhaustion. It was purpose. Not the borrowed purpose of a title or a marriage or a kingdom's expectations. Real purpose, the kind that grows from the ground up, rooted in something that cannot be stripped away by decree or the cowardice of a man who was not strong enough to question the lies he was fed. She whispered to the 3 sleeping children pressed against her body, "Someday we will go back. Not for him, not for the crown, for you, because you deserve to know where you come from, and they deserve to see what they threw away." The wind howled outside, the fire crackled, 3 heartbeats pulsed against her skin. And 800 miles south, in a palace built on bones, Alpha King Valor Drakkar sat alone in his study and stared at a document that his private investigators had just delivered, a birth record, from a northern settlement beyond the frozen wastes. 3 children, born to a woman matching the description of the exiled queen. Triplets. His hand shook so badly, the parchment rattled. 3 children, the sacred number. The number that had not appeared in the royal bloodline for 6 generations. The number that the ancient prophecies said would herald either the salvation or the destruction of the Alpha line. And he had sent their mother into the wilderness to die. The document slipped from his fingers and floated to the floor. Valor pressed both hands against his face, and for the first time since he took the crown, the Alpha King of Ashenvale wept. But tears do not fix what power breaks, and somewhere in the shadows of the palace, Malric's network was already moving, because the High Regent had his own sources, his own informants, his own spies scattered across every settlement from the capital to the frozen edge of the known world. And if those children were real, if they were what the prophecy described, then they were not just a threat to Malric's plans. They were the only threat that mattered. He would need to act before the king did. He would need to find them first. Malric moved before the ink on the birth record was dry. He had built his network the way a spider builds a web, not for beauty, but for function. Every strand connected to a nerve. Every vibration told a story. And the vibration that reached him 3 hours after Valor's private investigator delivered that document to the king's study was loud enough to rearrange his entire operation. 3 children, triplets, born to the exiled queen in a northern settlement beyond the frozen wastes. Malric stood in his private chamber beneath the palace, a room that did not appear on any architectural plan, accessed through a passage behind the library's eastern wall. The chamber smelled of tallow candles and old stone. Maps covered every surface, not the decorative maps that hung in the war room upstairs, but operational maps. Trade routes, patrol schedules, settlement locations, the geography of control. His informant stood across the table. A thin man named Draven, who ran a supply caravan between the border towns and the northern settlements. Draven had the hollow look of a man who served too many masters and slept too few hours. "How reliable is this?" Malric asked. "I saw the birth record myself. Settlement called Thornhaven, run by a woman named Haldra, former Iron Ridge military. The mother matches every physical description of the exiled queen. 2 boys, 1 girl, born 7 months after the exile decree." 7 months? So she was already pregnant during the trial. That would be the math, yes. Malric pressed his fingers against the map where the northern settlements clustered like barnacles on the underside of the known world. 60 miles beyond the last Ashenvale patrol route, 3 weeks of hard travel through terrain that killed horses and froze men solid. "Does the king know?" "His investigator delivered a report tonight. I could not access the contents, but the investigator traveled the same road I did. He would have found the same record." "Then Valor knows. Or will know by morning." Malric dismissed Draven with a gesture and stood alone in the candlelight, calculating. The mathematics of power are not complicated. They are brutal. A man who controls the succession controls the kingdom. For 5 years, Malric had ensured that no legitimate heir existed, first by engineering Elyra's exile, then by subtly sabotaging every potential alliance that might produce a replacement queen. Valor remained unmarried, remained heirless, and with each passing year the crown's authority depended more heavily on the institutional structures that Malric administered. 3 children changed that equation completely. If those triplets were legitimate, if they carried the Sacred Alpha Bloodline, then Malric's entire architecture of control collapsed the moment Valor acknowledged them. The succession would be secured. The king would have leverage independent of Malric's systems. And the investigation into the original conspiracy, which Malric suspected Valor was already conducting in secret, would gain the one thing it currently lacked: a reason for the court to care. A king with no heir is vulnerable to his advisors. A king with 3 heirs is answerable to no one. Malric could not allow those children to reach Ashenvale. The possessive instinct in powerful men is never about love. It is about architecture. They build worlds and then defend those worlds with a ferocity that has nothing to do with the people inside them and everything to do with the structures themselves. Malric did not hate Elyra. He did not hate the children. He hated what they represented. A variable he could not control, a door he could not lock, a future that did not require his permission. This is the psychology of every tyrant who ever lived. Not cruelty for its own sake. Cruelty in service of order. Their order. The kind that functions only when every outcome is predetermined and every threat is neutralized before it becomes real. He summoned Commander Greaves. Greaves arrived within the hour, a thick-necked man with a face that looked like it had been assembled from leftover parts. Broken nose, misaligned jaw, eyes that sat too deep in their sockets, giving him the permanent expression of someone peering out from inside a cave. He commanded the Crown's Shadow Corps, a unit that did not officially exist and performed tasks that never appeared in any report. "I need a team in the north," Malric said. "Fast travel, no banners, no identification, 6 operatives, maximum. Target? A settlement called Thornhaven, beyond the frozen wastes." Greaves did not react. Reacting was not in his job description. Timeline. "Yesterday, the king may send his own people. If he does, your team needs to arrive first." "And the objective?" Malric looked at him. The candlelight caught the High Regent's face from below, turning his features into a mask of sharp angles and deep shadow. "There are 3 children in that settlement. I need them removed from the equation." "Removed how?" "Use your judgment. But understand this clearly, Greaves. Those children cannot reach this kingdom alive. If they do, everything we have built collapses. Everything." Greaves absorbed this the way he absorbed every directive, without opinion, without hesitation, without the inconvenience of conscience. "Travel time is 3 weeks minimum through the wastes." "I know." "Attrition rate for winter crossings is about 40%. Then send enough men that 60% is sufficient." "Understood." Greaves left. Malric stood alone again, staring at the map, and felt something he had not felt in years. Not fear exactly. Proximity to fear. The awareness that for the first time since he had engineered Elyra's fall, the outcome was not entirely within his control. Control is the drug that powerful men never admit they are addicted to. It does not produce euphoria. It produces the absence of anxiety, which the brain eventually cannot distinguish from happiness. When control slips, when a variable emerges that the system cannot absorb, the withdrawal is immediate and savage. The mind races. The body tightens. Every shadow becomes a threat because the architecture of certainty has developed a crack, and cracks in architecture do not repair themselves. They spread. Malric blew out the candle and climbed the stairs to the palace above, where 300 courtiers slept in beds paid for by a system he had spent a decade constructing. In his private study, Vialor had not moved. The birth record lay on the floor where it had fallen from his shaking hands. He stared at it from his chair like a man staring at a wound he inflicted on himself, unwilling to look away, unable to look closer. 3 children. The number hammered through his skull like a blacksmith working iron. 3. The sacred number. The number the old bloodline text said would appear only when the Alpha line faced either its greatest salvation or its final destruction. 6 generations without triplets. 6 generations of singles and twins and stillbirths and the slow, grinding erosion of a bloodline that was supposed to be eternal. And he had sent their mother into the frozen wastes with a thin cloak and a waterskin. His wolf howled inside him. Not the disciplined, controlled presence he had learned to manage since childhood. A raw, jagged sound that tore through his chest cavity and left his ribs aching. The wolf did not understand politics or evidence or the careful manipulation of a High Regent's conspiracy. The wolf understood one thing with absolute primal clarity. Mate, pups, gone. Vaelor pressed his fists against his temples and tried to think through the noise. There is a specific kind of hell reserved for men who discover their own complicity. Not the hell of ignorance. Ignorance is comfortable, even merciful. The hell of knowledge. The grinding, sleepless, bone-level understanding that you are not a victim of circumstance but an active participant in your own catastrophe. That the evidence was there. That the questions were obvious. That a braver man, a more honest man, a man less drunk on his own authority, would have looked harder, pushed back, demanded proof instead of accepting the convenient narrative that someone else constructed for him. Vaelor was in that hell now, and he would remain there for every remaining minute of his life. He picked up the birth record, read it again. 2 boys, 1 girl, healthy, full term, delivered by a settlement healer in a place called Thornhaven. He needed to find them. He needed to find her. But moving openly would alert Malric, and Malric was the one enemy Vaelor could not afford to warn. The High Regent's network was too deep, too integrated into the kingdom's operational systems. A direct confrontation without preparation would not remove Malric. It would trigger a response that could fracture the entire government. Vaelor needed someone he could trust, someone outside Malric's influence, someone who owed nothing to the court, and everything to the truth. He thought for a long time. Then he sent for Theron. Guard Captain Theron arrived at the king's study an hour before dawn. He looked like he had not slept well in months, which was accurate. The man who had escorted Elyra to the gate and whispered directions to the northern pass had been carrying the weight of that night like a stone in his chest ever since. "Close the door," Vaelor said. Theron closed it, stood at attention. His face betrayed nothing, because a career in the palace guard teaches a man to keep his face empty even when his mind is screaming. "Sit down, Theron." "I prefer to stand, Your Majesty." That was not a request. Theron sat. The chair was too small for him. He looked uncomfortable in the way that large, physical men always look uncomfortable in rooms designed for politics instead of action. Vaelor slid the birth record across the desk. Theron read it. His expression did not change, but his breathing did. A slight hitch. A held breath released slowly. The micro-reactions of a man absorbing information that confirms something he already suspected. "You knew," Vaelor said. "I did not know about the children. But you knew she was telling the truth. At the trial, when she said she was pregnant." Theron looked at the king for a long time. The silence between them was the kind that exists between two men who both understand that the next word spoken will determine whether they are allies or enemies. "I believed her," Theron said. "Yes." "Why did you not tell me? Would you have listened?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Vaelor opened his mouth to answer, then stopped, closed it, let the silence say what his pride could not. The honest answer was no. 5 years ago, standing in the throne room with Malric at his shoulder and 300 wolves watching, Vaelor would not have listened to a guard captain contradicting the findings of the Crown Security Council. He would have dismissed it as sentiment, as insubordination, as one more voice trying to complicate a decision that had already been made. That is the architecture of authoritarian failure. The system does not silence dissent through violence alone. It silences dissent through structure, by creating hierarchies so rigid that the truth cannot travel upward. The people closest to the facts are the people farthest from the decisions, and the people making the decisions are surrounded by advisors whose careers depend on telling the king what he wants to hear. "No," Vaelor said, "I would not have listened." "Then you understand why I stayed silent." "I understand. I do not forgive it. I am not asking for forgiveness, Your Majesty. I am not the one who needs it." Another silence. Longer this time. Vaelor's jaw worked. A muscle in his neck twitched. His golden eyes carried the flat, exhausted look of a man who has been fighting a war inside his own skull for 5 years and is finally losing. "I need you to do something," Vaelor said. "Something that cannot go through official channels. Something that Malric cannot know about." "What?" "I need you to go north, find Elyra, find the children, bring them home." "Home?" Theron repeated the word like he was testing its weight. "You think she will come willingly?" "No." "Then what exactly am I bringing?" "A message. From me. Personally." "Saying what?" Vaelor stood, walked to the window. The pre-dawn sky was the color of a bruise, purple and black and sick yellow at the edges where the sun was trying to break through. "That I know the truth, that the charges were fabricated, that Malric engineered the entire thing, that I was a fool, that I am sorry. With respect, Your Majesty, an apology is not going to be enough." "I know. She will want more than words." "I know that too. She may want your head. If that is what it costs, she can have it. But the children cannot stay in the north. The bloodline is failing, Theron. The kingdom is weakening. The Alpha line has been degrading for 5 years, and the seers say it will collapse completely within another 3. Those triplets are the only legitimate heirs. Without them, Ashenvale dies." Theron leaned back in the chair, studied the king, not with the deference of a subordinate, but with the frank assessment of a man who has watched another man fall apart slowly enough to catalog the stages. "You do not want those children because you love them. You want them because you need them." The accusation landed like a fist. Vaelor turned from the window, and for the first time, Theron saw something in the king's eyes that he had never seen before. Not anger, not authority. Shame. Raw, undiluted, physically painful shame. "I do not know if I love them. I have never met them. I do not know their faces or their voices or the way they laugh. I know they exist. I know they are mine, and I know that every night for 5 years I have lain awake wondering whether the woman I sent into the wastes survived, and whether the children she claimed to carry were real, and whether I am the kind of man who deserves to call himself a father after what I did. So no, Theron, I do not know if I want them because I love them or because I need them, but I know this. If I do nothing, Malric will find them first, and Malric will not be sending a message. Bishim. The weight of that statement settled over both men like a physical thing. Theron understood. The guard captain had survived 20 years in the palace by reading the currents of power the way a sailor reads wind, not by watching the surface, but by feeling the pressure shifts beneath it. And the pressure shift Vaelor was describing was not hypothetical. It was already in motion. How much time do I have? Theron asked. Less than you need. Malric has his own intelligence sources. If I know about the children, he knows or will know within days. His people are faster than mine, better funded, better equipped. And if I get there first, convince Elyra to move. South, east, anywhere Malric's network cannot reach her. I will handle the political situation here. Dismantle his influence. Prepare the court for the truth. That is a lot of preparation for a man who could not see through a lie 5 years ago. Careful, Theron. You asked me to be honest. I asked you to find my family. The honesty is a bonus I did not request. Theron stood. The chair scraped against the stone floor. He squared his shoulders, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked like the soldier he was, rather than the reluctant witness he had been. I will leave today. 2 men, light gear. We will travel the northern pass and reach the wastes within 10 days. If Thornhaven is where the record says, another 4 days beyond that, 14 days. At minimum. Malric's shadow course can make the same trip in 12. Then I had better leave now. Theron moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. Your Majesty. What? If I find her, when I find her, she will ask me one question. She will ask whether you sent me because you love her or because you need what she carries. I need to know which answer is true, because she will smell a lie before I finish speaking it. Vaelor looked at him. The lamplight caught the king's face in profile. The hard jaw, the golden eyes dulled by years of private torment, the mouth that had spoken a sentence that shattered a woman's world and had not found the right words since. Tell her both, and tell her that I understand if neither one is enough. Theron nodded. Left. His boots echoed down the corridor and faded into the pre-dawn silence of a palace that was rotting from the inside and did not yet know how to stop. 2 hours later, Malric received a report that Guard Captain Theron had departed the palace through the northern gate with 2 soldiers and winter provisions. The information arrived via a kitchen servant who supplemented her income by noting which officers left through which gates at which hours. Malric paid her 3 silver marks per month. It was the cheapest and most effective intelligence investment in his entire network. He sat in his study, the official one, not the hidden chamber, and tapped his fingers against the desk in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap a calculation. Each calculation a variable in an equation that was becoming dangerously complex. The king was moving, sending his own man north, which meant Vaelor had seen the birth record, which meant Vaelor knew about the children, which meant the timeline for Greaves and his shadow course had just shortened from comfortable to critical. Malric summoned his secretary. Send a fast rider to intercept Commander Greaves. Message is simple. The timeline has moved up. He is now in a race. If Theron reaches the target first, the mission fails. Yes, High Regent. And Aldros. Send for Royal Physician Aldros. The physician, sir. The physician. Tell him I need to discuss the medical records he provided during the Queen's trial. Tell him to bring the originals. Yes, sir. And one more thing. Has the king scheduled any unusual meetings? Any private audiences outside the normal court calendar? The secretary consulted a leather-bound ledger. Nothing officially logged, but the king has been spending increased time in his private study. The door guard reports that he has been requesting old Crown security files from the archive. Which files? The investigation records related to the Queen's trial. Malric's tapping stopped. There it was. The confirmation he did not want but expected. Vaelor was not just sending people north. He was building a case, pulling the threads of the original conspiracy, reassembling the evidence in reverse. A man dismantling a lie is far more dangerous than a man building one. The liar knows every weak point, every fabrication, every place where the narrative was stitched together from whole cloth. But the man pulling it apart has the advantage of truth, and truth has a gravitational pull that warps everything around it. Once enough threads are pulled, the entire fabric unravels, not gradually, but all at once, in a catastrophic collapse that buries everyone standing beneath it. Malric had perhaps 3 weeks, maybe 4. After that, Valor would have enough evidence to present to the Crown Council, and no amount of institutional leverage would save the High Regent from the consequences. 3 weeks to eliminate the children. 3 weeks to ensure the succession remained broken. 3 weeks to find a way to either co-opt Valor's investigation or make it irrelevant. He poured himself a measure of dark wine and drank it in one swallow. The warmth did nothing for the cold settling into his chest. 800 miles north, Elyra was teaching Kaelin how to hold a blade. The boy was 5 years old and already built like a fighter. Compact, low-centered, with shoulders that promised breadth and hands that gripped the wooden practice sword like they had been designed for exactly this purpose. His dark hair fell across his golden eyes, and he kept pushing it back with an impatient gesture that reminded Elyra so strongly of Valor that she had to look away for a moment to keep her composure. "Wider stance," she said. "Your feet are too close together. Someone pushes you, you fall. Plant them. Roots, not branches." "Like this?" "Wider. Good. Now the grip, not the death squeeze. You are holding a tool, not strangling an enemy. Firm but flexible. The sword has to move with your body, not against it." "Marin says I have wolf hands." "Marin says a lot of things. What did she mean?" "She said my hands know what to do before my brain tells them." Elyra crouched in front of her son, looked at his face, the golden eyes that were his father's, the stubborn jaw that was hers, the expression of absolute concentration that belonged to neither parent and was entirely his own. "Marin is right. You do have good instincts, but instincts without training are just reflexes. Reflexes keep you alive for 5 seconds. Training keeps you alive for a lifetime. So we train. Can Orion train too? Orion has different gifts. He talks to the wolves." "I know. Like actually talks to them, not commands. Conversations. Old Fenris followed him around for an hour yesterday and did everything Orion asked without Orion raising his voice once. Huldra says she has never seen anything like it." Elyra straightened. Across the settlement's central yard, she could see Orion sitting cross-legged near the well, surrounded by 3 of the settlement's patrol wolves. The animals were enormous. Northern wolves bred for size and endurance. Nothing like the elegant court breeds of Ashenvale. They should have been wary of a 5-year-old child. Instead, they lay around him in a loose circle, ears forward, eyes soft, bodies relaxed in the way that wolves relax only around pack leaders. They trust completely. Orion was speaking to them in a low voice, not words exactly, sounds, tones, a language that existed somewhere between human speech and wolf communication, a bridge that Elyra had never seen anyone construct before. It was the Alpha Authority, the pure, undiluted version that the royal bloodline had been losing for generations. The ability to command wolves not through dominance but through connection, not by overpowering them but by speaking their language so fluently that obedience became indistinguishable from choice. And in Huldra's lodge, Selene was doing something equally impossible. The girl had found a bird, a small northern finch with a broken wing, and was cradling it in her hands. Marin stood behind her, watching with her one good eye wide. "She is healing it," Marin said when Elyra entered. I watched her pick it up. The wing was snapped clean through. 2 minutes in her hands, and the bone is knitting. I can see it. I can feel the heat coming off her palms. Selene looked up at her mother. The girl's eyes were different from her brother's. Not golden, but silver, a color that Elyra recognized from the oldest portraits in the Palace of Moons. The Moonblood Queens, the ancient healing line that had disappeared from the royal bloodline 4 generations ago. "It was hurting, Mama," Selene said. "I could feel it hurting, so I made it stop." Elyra knelt beside her daughter, touched the bird's wing. The bone was solid, whole, as if it had never been broken. "How did you know how to do that?" "I just knew. The same way I know when people are sad or when someone has a fever. I can feel what is wrong, and then I can feel how to fix it. Marin caught Elyra's eye over Celine's head. The old healer's expression was not wonder, it was fear. The kind of fear that comes from recognizing something so powerful that it changes the rules of the world you thought you understood. "Do you know what she is?" Marin asked quietly, after Celine had released the bird and watched it fly in circles around the lodge before finding the open window. "I know what she might be." "Might be." "Elyra, I have been healing wolves and humans for 40 years. I have seen herbs work and poultices work and time work. I have never seen a 5-year-old child knit a broken bone with her bare hands. That is not might be. That is the moonblood gift. The real one, not the diluted version the court healers pretend to practice. The actual bloodline ability that the old texts say could cure plagues and mend shattered spines and pull people back from the edge of death." "I know what it is, Marin." "Then you know what it means. If anyone south of the Wastes finds out that girl exists, every kingdom on the continent will want her. Not as a princess, as a weapon, a strategic medical asset, the kind of resource that wars are fought over. No one is going to find out. You cannot hide her forever. She is growing. The power is growing with her. In another year, she will not be healing birds. She will be healing people. And people talk. Every parent faces a version of this moment. The moment when the thing that makes your child extraordinary becomes the thing that puts them in danger. The gift becomes the target. The brilliance becomes the vulnerability. And the parent must decide, do you suppress the gift to protect the child, or do you nurture the gift and prepare the child to protect themselves? There is no right answer. There is only the answer you can live with. Elyra chose preparation. She began training all 3 children with an intensity that made even Haldra raise an eyebrow. Kaelin's combat training expanded from basic blade work to tactical thinking. How to read terrain, how to use an opponent's strength against them, how to fight when outnumbered. Orion's wolf communication was channeled into leadership exercises, coordinating pack movements, establishing authority over wolves twice his size, learning the difference between commanding and connecting. Celine's healing was structured into a discipline: anatomy, wound assessment, triage priorities, the mental framework needed to use a gift without being consumed by it. "You are pushing them hard," Haldra said one evening, watching from the lodge doorway as Elyra drilled Kaelin through a sparring sequence for the 3rd consecutive hour. "I am preparing them." "For what?" Elyra did not answer immediately. She watched Kaelin execute a disarm technique she had taught him that morning. Clean, fast, instinctive, the kind of movement that took adult soldiers months to learn. The boy reset his stance and looked at her, waiting for the next instruction. Golden eyes bright with the particular intensity of a child who has found the thing they were born to do. "For the world that is coming for them," Elyra said, "whether I want it to or not." Haldra studied her. The old commander had survived 2 decades beyond the Wastes by reading people the way other people read weather, watching for the pressure drops and temperature shifts that signal incoming storms. "Something changed. What do you know that you have not told me?" "Nothing specific. But something general. I know how power works, Haldra. I was married to it for 5 years. Power does not forget. It does not forgive, and it does not leave loose ends. My children are a loose end. One day someone will come to tie them off. Then we will be ready. We. You keep saying we. You are part of this settlement. Your children are part of this settlement. When someone comes for one of mine, they come for all of mine. That is how it works up here. Not because of bloodlines or oaths or political obligation, because that is what community means when the alternative is dying alone in the snow. There is a version of loyalty that courts never produce. It is not performed. It is not rewarded with titles or land grants or favorable marriages. It exists because people choose it daily in the small acts of shared labor and mutual protection that turn strangers into family. Haldra's settlement ran on this loyalty. Every meal shared, every roof repaired, every night spent on watch while others slept was a brick in a structure that no king could decree into existence. Elyra had spent 5 years inside that structure. 5 years earning her place not through bloodline, but through sweat and calluses and the willingness to stand in freezing rain and fix a fence because the fence needed fixing. And she had discovered something that her years in the Palace of Moons had never taught her. Real strength is not the power to command. It is the willingness to serve without the expectation of recognition. 3 weeks after Veilor's conversation with Theron, a sentry at the edge of Thornhaven spotted movement on the southern ridge. The sentry's name was Rolf. He was a former border patrolman from the Ashenvale military who had deserted 8 years ago after watching his commander execute a family of half-blood wolves for crossing into Ashenvale territory without documentation. He had walked north, found Thornhaven, and never looked back. He was the best watchman in the settlement because he understood, from personal experience, that the threats worth watching for were the ones that wore familiar uniforms. He watched the movement for 20 minutes before he was certain. 6 figures. Moving in a V formation. Fast. Professional. No horses. They were on foot, which meant they had abandoned their mounts at the tree line to avoid detection. They carried no visible banners or insignia. Rolf dropped from his observation post and ran. He found Haldra in the workshop, sharpening axes. 6 contacts on the southern ridge, military formation, no identification, moving fast and moving quiet. Haldra set down the axe. Her hands did not shake. Her expression did not change. 22 years of frontier leadership had ground away every response except the one that mattered. How far out? 4 hours at their pace, maybe 3 if they pick it up. Formation type? Assault 5. 2 flankers wide. Standard elite unit deployment. These are not scouts, Haldra. These are operators. Haldra stood, walked to the door of the workshop, looked south across the settlement's yard toward the tree line that marked the boundary between Thornhaven and the open terrain beyond. Get Elyra, now! Rolf found Elyra in the training yard with Kaelin. She was correcting his footwork when Rolf's expression told her everything his mouth had not yet said. How many? She asked. 6. From where? South. Ashenvale. Probably. Elyra's jaw set. Her hands dropped to her sides. Beside her, Kaelin looked up at his mother's face and recognized something he had never seen there before. Not fear. Decision. The hard, immediate, total shift from one mode of existence to another. From training to survival. From preparation to execution. Mama? Go find your brother and sister. Bring them to Haldra's lodge. Do not stop for anything. Do not talk to anyone. Move. Kaelin moved. He did not ask questions. 5 years of training had taught him to read his mother's voice the way she had taught him to read terrain. Not the words, but the pressure behind them. When that pressure hit a certain threshold, questions were a luxury that could get people killed. Elyra found Haldra at the lodge. The old commander was already pulling weapons from a locked chest. Real weapons, not training tools. Steel blades, crossbows. A short sword that Haldra handled with the familiarity of a woman who had used it to end arguments that words could not settle. This is what you were preparing for, Haldra said. It was not a question. Yes. Who sent them? If I had to guess, Malric, the High Regent, the man who engineered my exile. Not the king? Veilor would not send a kill team. He would send a diplomat or a soldier he trusted. Malric sends shadows. Then these are his shadows. And they are here to make sure my children never reach Ashenvale. Haldra handed Elyra the short sword. Their eyes met. 2 women. 2 exiles. 2 survivors who understood, with the clarity that only comes from personal experience, that the powerful do not send 6 operators through the frozen wastes to deliver an invitation. How do you want to handle this? Haldra asked. Your settlement, your call. My settlement, your fight. But you are right. They came here, so it is my problem now. I have 30 fighters who can hold a blade and mean it. Another 20 who can shoot a crossbow without embarrassing themselves. Against 6 elite operators, those are workable numbers. They are not here for a battle. They are here for a surgical strike. Find the targets. Eliminate them. Leave before anyone can organize a response. 6 is the right number for that kind of operation. Small enough to move fast, big enough to handle resistance. Then we do not give them the surgical option. We make it expensive. Perimeter defense, overlapping sightlines, funnel them into a kill zone where numbers matter more than skill. And the children? Hidden, deep. Marin's emergency shelter in the caves north of the settlement. It is designed for exactly this scenario. I have been preparing for southern interference since the day I built this place. You expected this. I expected something. The South always comes eventually. They cannot stand the idea that something exists beyond their control. Elyra gripped the sword. It felt right in her hand. 5 years of frontier life had rebuilt her body into something the Palace of Moons would not recognize. Lean, hard, weathered, with the grip strength to crack walnuts and the stamina to march for days without rest. The soft queen who had stood in the throne room and pleaded for justice was gone. In her place stood a woman who had delivered triplets in a timber lodge, butchered game in sub-zero temperatures, and trained 3 children to survive in a world that wanted them dead. That transformation is not dramatic. It does not happen in a single moment of revelation. It happens in the accumulation of 1,000 small choices, each one barely noticeable, each one shifting the weight from what was lost toward what was built. And when the moment of crisis arrives, the woman who stands to face it is not the woman who fell. She is the woman who got back up so many times that standing became the only posture she remembers. Elyra walked to Haldra's lodge, opened the door, found Kaelin, Orion, and Selene sitting together on the sleeping platform. Kaelin had his practice sword across his knees. Orion sat cross-legged with his eyes closed, and 2 of the settlement's wolves had positioned themselves at the door without being asked. Selene held her mother's spare cloak against her chest like a shield. 3 children, 5 years old, golden eyes and silver eyes, and the combined genetic legacy of a bloodline that empires had fought wars to possess. Elyra crouched in front of them. "Listen to me carefully. We need to move to the caves. Merrin will take you. You will stay there until I come for you. No noise, no light, no leaving the shelter for any reason." "Someone is coming," Kaelin said. Not a question. "Yes." "Bad people." "Yes." "I can fight. I know you can, and someday you will. But today the best way to fight is to survive. Do you understand?" Kaelin looked at her, 5 years old and already carrying the weight of comprehension behind those golden eyes. The understanding that the world contained people who wanted to hurt him for reasons he could not yet grasp, and that his mother was the wall between him and those people. "I understand." "Orion, can you tell the wolves to guard the cave entrance?" Orion opened his eyes, nodded once. The 2 wolves at the door shifted their weight, and Elyra could have sworn she saw something pass between the boy and the animals. Not a command, but an agreement. A pact between species that required no language and no force. "Selene." "Yes, Mama." "If anyone is hurt, you help them. That is your job tonight. Can you do that?" The girl's silver eyes were steady. Frightened, yes. But beneath the fear, something older, something inherited. The Moonblood gift was not just healing. It was the capacity to remain functional in the presence of suffering, to see pain without being paralyzed by it, to act when every instinct screams retreat. "I can do it." "Good. Merrin is waiting outside. Go with her. Stay together. I will come for you when it is over." She watched them leave. 3 small figures walking into the northern darkness with an old one-eyed healer and 2 wolves flanking them like escorts. The sight carved something into Elyra's chest that she knew would never heal. The image of her children walking away from her into danger, and the knowledge that she might not be alive to walk them back. That is motherhood stripped to its essence. Not the soft version, not the decorated version. The version that exists at 2 in the morning in a frontier settlement with 6 killers approaching from the south. The version that holds a sword and stands between her children and the world and says, with every fiber of a body rebuilt by 5 years of brutal survival, not tonight, not them, not ever. Elyra turned south, gripped the blade, and in the darkness beyond the tree line, 6 shadows moved closer. The first shadow died before he cleared the tree line. Rolf put a crossbow bolt through the man's throat from 40 yards, a shot made in near total darkness by a former border patrolman who had spent 8 years learning how northern starlight behaves differently than southern starlight, how it bends around snow cover and creates contrast patterns that trained eyes can read like a map. The bolt entered just below the jaw and exited through the back of the neck. The shadow dropped without a sound, which was its own kind of mercy. The next 5 seconds would not be merciful at all. The remaining 5 operators scattered. They were good. Greaves had selected them for exactly this kind of scenario. Urban infiltration, close quarters elimination, the ugly mathematics of killing specific targets in confined spaces. But Greaves had briefed them for a sleeping settlement with minimal security. Not for a settlement on full alert with 30 fighters dug into prepared positions and overlapping crossbow lanes covering every approach vector. The second shadow took a bolt in the shoulder and kept moving. He made it 20 yards into the settlement perimeter before Haldra's lead fighter, a scarred woman named Fen, stepped out of a doorway and put a hand axe into his chest. The impact stopped his forward momentum like a wall. He looked down at the axe handle protruding from his sternum with an expression of pure confusion, the face of a man whose operational assumptions have just been fatally revised. 3 and 4 came together from the eastern approach, low and fast, blades drawn, heading for the cluster of lodges where intelligence had placed the queen and her children. They crossed 20 yards of open ground before the trap closed. 8 fighters emerging from behind wood piles and water barrels, forming a semicircle that cut off retreat and compressed the engagement space into a kill box barely 10 feet across. The fighting was brutal and short. Northern frontier wolves do not fight with the disciplined formations of palace guards. They fight the way people fight when losing means watching their families die. With teeth, with fury, with the kind of savagery that training cannot replicate because it comes from a place deeper than skill. It comes from the understanding, carved into bone by years of surviving where survival is not guaranteed, that hesitation is a luxury paid for with blood. Both shadows went down. One was still breathing. Fen knelt beside him, pulled the identifying marks from his gear and handed them to Haldra, without comment. Small metal tokens stamped with a cipher that meant nothing to most people, but everything to anyone who had served in Ashenvale's military intelligence. Shadow Course, Haldra said, turning the token between her fingers. Malric's private unit. Not private enough, Fen replied. The 5th shadow was the problem. He had peeled away from the formation the moment the first bolt flew. Not running, but repositioning. While his teammates drew fire and died in the settlement's prepared kill zones, he had circled north, away from the fighting, away from the defenders, toward the caves. Elyra realized it 3 minutes too late. She was at the southern barricade when the pattern clicked. 5 contacts engaged, 6 contacts reported. The math left a remainder, and in combat, remainders kill people. "One is missing," she said. "Haldra, one is missing." "I count 5. "Rolf said 6. 5 here. 1 unaccounted for." Haldra's face changed. The combat hardness remained, but beneath it something shifted. A recalculation, a reassessment, the experienced commander's recognition that an unaccounted enemy is worse than a visible one because you cannot fight what you cannot see. "The caves," Haldra said. Elyra was already running. The distance between the settlement and the cave system was 600 yards of dense forest. In daylight, with clear paths, a fast runner could cover it in under 3 minutes. In darkness, over frozen ground broken by root systems and rock outcroppings, with adrenaline turning every shadow into a threat, it took Elyra nearly 5 minutes that felt like 5 years, that felt like 5. She ran the way a wolf runs when it smells its pups in danger. Not with technique, not with efficiency, but with the blind, desperate, total commitment of a body that has stopped calculating cost and started calculating only speed. Branches tore at her face. Her boots slipped on ice-covered rock. She fell twice, got up without stopping, kept running. The survival instinct in parents is not rational. It does not weigh options. It does not consider risk. It is the oldest program in the biological code. Older than language, older than thought, older than the conscious self that believes it makes decisions. When a parent's children are in danger, the conscious self steps aside and something ancient takes control. Something that has been running in the background of every nervous system since the first organism protected its offspring from a predator. It does not ask permission. It does not request input. It moves. Elyra reached the cave entrance and found Merrin on the ground. The old healer was conscious but disoriented, blood running from a gash above her remaining eye. She had been struck from behind, a professional blow, precise enough to incapacitate without killing, which told Elyra everything about the training of the man who delivered it. "He went inside," Merrin said. Her voice was thin, stretched tight by pain and the effort of remaining coherent. "Fast, quiet. I did not hear him until the impact." "The children?" "In the back chamber, where I left them." Elyra gripped the short sword and entered the cave. The darkness was total. The cave system ran back into the mountain through a series of connected chambers, natural formations expanded by Haldra's people over 2 decades into an emergency shelter with supplies, water, and enough depth to survive extended siege. Elyra had trained here. She knew the layout, but knowing a layout in training and navigating it in darkness while hunting a professional killer are separated by a distance that no amount of preparation can fully bridge. She moved by touch. Right hand on the wall, left hand holding the blade low and forward. Each step tested before weight committed. The air smelled of cold stone and mineral water and the faint organic scent of the supply stores deeper in the system. Sound traveled strangely in the caves. Every footstep echoed, multiplied, bounced off surfaces until direction became meaningless. She could hear her own breathing, too fast, too shallow, the respiratory pattern of a body running on adrenaline and fear. She forced it slower, controlled it, the way she had taught Kalen to control his breathing during sparring. In, hold, out. The body follows the breath. Master the breath and the body becomes a tool instead of a liability. 30 feet in, the tunnel split. Left branch led to the supply chamber. Right branch led to the back room where Marin had hidden the children. She went right. 20 more feet. The tunnel widened into a chamber roughly the size of Haldra's main lodge. Elyra stopped at the threshold and listened. 2 sounds. Both faint. Both meaningful. The first was breathing. Adult breathing. Controlled and deliberate. Positioned somewhere to her left. The operative. He was waiting. He had found the chamber and understood that the targets were somewhere inside, and instead of charging blind into the dark, he had stopped. Set up. Let his eyes adjust. Let the cave work for him instead of against him. The second sound was smaller, a whimper, brief, suppressed. The sound of a child trying very hard to be silent and failing because fear does not obey instructions. Celine. Elyra's grip tightened on the sword. The whimper told her 2 things. The children were alive, and the operative had not yet reached them, because a Shadow Corps killer who had reached his targets would not be waiting in the dark. He would be finishing the job and leaving. She had seconds, maybe less. "I know you are there," the operative said. His voice was calm, conversational, the voice of a man conducting business. "I heard you coming from 50 yards out, heavy feet, panic breathing, not trained for cave work." Elyra said nothing. "There are 3 children in this chamber. My orders are specific regarding them. You can make this easier or harder. The outcome does not change. Your 5 friends outside might disagree with that assessment." Silence. A recalculation. The operative had not known about the settlement's defense. He had entered the cave believing his team was handling the perimeter. The information that they had failed changed his equation, but it did not change his mission. Shadow Corps operatives are not built for improvisation. They are built for execution, and execution continues until the objective is achieved or the operative is dead. "It does not matter," he said. "I only need 30 seconds. You do not have 30 seconds. The thing about fighting in total darkness is that it strips away every advantage except 2, spatial awareness and the willingness to commit. The operative had the first. He had positioned himself, established his orientation, marked his targets by sound. Elyra had the second, and the second, in the dark, is what decides who walks out. She moved, not toward the voice, toward the children. She covered the distance in 4 strides, blade extended, and felt the displacement of air that told her the operative was moving too, converging on the same point from a different angle. 2 predators closing on the same coordinates in absolute blindness. Their blades met before their bodies did. The impact jolted through Elyra's wrist and up her forearm. Steel on steel. The sound was enormous in the confined space, a metallic scream that bounced off every surface and filled the chamber with echoes. She felt him shift weight, felt the pressure on her blade change direction. He was good. Trained in close-quarters combat with the kind of muscle memory that operates independent of vision. His second strike came low. She caught it on the crossguard and turned it aside, but the force drove her back a step. Then something happened that neither of them expected. Light. A soft silver glow that emanated from the back of the chamber like moonlight bleeding through a crack in the world. It started dim and grew steadily, filling the space with enough illumination to see shapes, outlines, faces. Celine, standing behind her brothers, hands raised, palms out, producing light from the same gift that healed broken bones and sensed fever. Not healing light. Something different. Something the Moonblood bloodline had not manifested in living memory. Raw energy shaped by fear and instinct, and the 5-year-old understanding that Mama was in danger and darkness was helping the bad man. The light changed everything. The operative's face was visible now, hard, angular, professional, the face of a man who kills for institutional reasons and sleeps soundly afterward. His eyes widened when the light hit them, not from the brightness, from what he saw. 3 children, golden and silver eyes blazing in the silver glow. 2 wolves flanking them, teeth bared, bodies coiled, and standing between him and those children, a woman who had been a queen and an exile and a frontier survivor and was now something older than all of those things. A mother defending her young with a blade and a body that had forgotten how to consider retreat. Elyra saw him clearly for the first time. Read his weight distribution. Identified his weapon, a combat knife, short range, designed for exactly the kind of confined killing he had been sent to perform. She did not give him time to use it. The strike came from an angle he did not anticipate because it was not a trained angle. It was instinct. The raw, unrefined animal geometry of a body that has stopped thinking about form and started thinking about survival. The blade caught him across the forearm. He dropped the knife. She drove forward, shoulder into his chest, using her lower center of gravity to unbalance him. He hit the cave wall. She pinned him there with the sword across his throat. His eyes met hers. In the silver light, she could see the moment his professional detachment cracked. Not from pain, from recognition. He was looking at a woman who would kill him, not threaten, not posture, kill. And the certainty of it was as visible as the blade against his neck. "Who sent you?" she said. "You know who sent me." "Say the name." "High Regent Malric. Standing orders. The children do not reach Ashenvale." "Why?" "Because they are the succession. Because they restore the bloodline. Because as long as they exist, Malric cannot control the throne." There it is. The architecture of tyranny laid bare in a cave by a dying man's confession. Not ideology, not madness, not the operatic villainy that stories prefer because it is simpler than the truth. Just control. The cold, institutional, systematic pursuit of control by a man who understood that power is not about sitting on the throne. It is about controlling who sits on the throne. And the most effective way to control the succession is to ensure there is no succession, to keep the bloodline broken, the king dependent, and every legitimate heir either dead or beyond reach. Malric was not evil in the way that simplistic narratives require their villains to be evil. He was rational, calculating, efficient. He had identified the structural vulnerability of a hereditary monarchy, that its power depends on reproduction, and reproduction can be sabotaged. And he had exploited it with the methodical precision of an engineer dismantling a machine. First the queen, then the heirs. Remove the biological components, and the institutional shell becomes a puppet theater operated by whoever controls the strings. This is the kind of evil that actually threatens civilizations. Not the dramatic kind, the administrative kind. The kind that files paperwork and signs orders and sleeps well because every atrocity has been filtered through enough layers of bureaucracy that no single hand feels responsible for the outcome. Elyra pressed the blade harder. A line of red appeared on the operative's throat. "How many more will he send?" "As many as it takes. You killed 6. He will send 12. You kill 12, he sends 20. The man does not stop. He does not have the capacity for it. You are a loose end, and he will pull until either you unravel or he does. Then he will unravel. Maybe, but not from here. You cannot fight Malric from a settlement in the frozen north with 30 fighters and a crossbow line. He controls the treasury, the military, the intelligence network, the trade routes. You are a wolf snarling at a machine. The machine does not care about your teeth." Elyra stared at the man. His breathing was steady despite the blade at his throat. Professional to the end. The kind of soldier who accepts death as a job hazard rather than an injustice. "There is another way," the operative said. His voice had shifted. Not pleading, informational. The tone of a man offering data because data is the only currency he has left. "Theron, guard captain. The king sent him north. Separate mission. He is on his way here to find you, to bring you back. Back to what? The king who exiled me? Back to the throne that needs your children to survive. The king knows the truth now, about the charges, about Malric, about all of it. He is dismantling the conspiracy from the inside, but he cannot finish without you, without the triplets. The words landed on Elyra like physical blows. Not because they were unexpected, she had always known. Somewhere beneath the layers of anger and survival and the deliberate work of rebuilding herself, that the past would not stay buried, that the South would come calling, that the choice between hiding and fighting would eventually arrive. And when it did, hiding would no longer be an option. But knowing a thing is coming and feeling it arrive are separated by an ocean of emotional distance. And standing in a cave with her children's silver light, illuminating the face of a man sent to kill them, hearing that the husband who destroyed her life now needed her to save his, that was the arrival. She pulled the blade back. The operative slumped against the wall. "Mama," Kaelin's voice. Small but controlled. The voice of a child who has watched his mother fight a man with a sword and is processing that information with the accelerated maturity that crisis forces onto young minds. Elyra turned, looked at her children. Kaelin stood in front of his siblings, practice sword raised, jaw set. Orion had his hands on both wolves, holding them steady. Celine's light was fading. The effort had drained her, and she swayed on her feet like a candle guttering in a draft. 3 children. 3 extraordinary, impossible, sacred children who represented everything a dying kingdom needed and everything a desperate tyrant wanted destroyed. Elyra looked at them and understood, with the terrible clarity that only arrives in moments of absolute crisis, that the life she had built was over. Not because it had failed, because it had succeeded. She had built a sanctuary, a home, a community that protected its own. She had raised 3 children into something remarkable. And now the very forces she had fled were at the door, and the sanctuary could not hold. Not against 12, not against 20, not against the institutional machinery of a man who would keep sending killers until the math worked in his favor. The settlement would burn for her. Haldra would fight. Fen would fight. Rolf would fight. Every person in Thornhaven would stand between her children and the South, because that is what community means when the alternative is surrender. And they would die. One by one, wave by wave, they would be ground down by a machine that had more resources, more reach, and more patience than any frontier settlement could match. Staying was not courage. Staying was selfishness. It was using the lives of people who loved her as a shield against a threat that only existed because of who she was and what her children carried in their blood. Leaving was the only move that protected everyone. But leaving meant going south. It meant facing Vialor. It meant walking back into the kingdom that had stripped her naked and thrown her into the snow and celebrated her absence over wine and silver banners. It meant becoming, once again, a piece on someone else's board, unless she refused to play by their rules. Elyra sheathed the sword, walked to her children, knelt in front of them, touched Kaelin's face, Orion's shoulder, Celine's trembling hands. "We are leaving Thornhaven," she said. "Where are we going?" Kaelin asked. Elyra stood, looked south, through the cave walls, through the mountain, through 800 miles of frozen terrain and political rot and the wreckage of a marriage built on a lie and destroyed by a conspiracy. "Home," she said. The word tasted like iron. But not the way they expect. She walked back to the operative. He was still breathing. She had cut his forearm, not his throat. A choice that would have consequences. A surviving Shadow Corps member who could report back. But she needed him alive, needed the message to travel. "Tell Malric something for me," she said. "Tell him the Queen is coming south, not as a fugitive, not as a petitioner, not as the broken woman he remembers. Tell him I'm bringing 3 children who carry more power in their blood than his entire network carries in its infrastructure. And tell him this: I am not coming for reconciliation. I am not coming for justice. I am coming for the throne, the whole thing. And if he is still standing when I arrive, I will personally dismantle every structure he built, brick by brick, name by name, until there is nothing left of his empire except the memory of a man who made the catastrophic mistake of believing that a mother would let her children be hunted." The operative stared at her. In the fading silver light, his expression was not fear. It was something closer to belief. The involuntary recognition that the woman standing over him was not bluffing, that the words she spoke were not threats but forecasts, descriptions of a future she intended to build with the same hands that had chopped wood and dressed kills and delivered triplets in a timber lodge during the worst winter the North had seen in a decade. Elyra stepped out of the cave and into the cold night air. Behind her, Thornhaven smoldered with the aftermath of a fight it had won. Ahead of her, 800 miles of hostile territory waited like an open mouth. She was no longer the exiled queen. She was no longer the frontier survivor. She was something new. Something that 5 years of suffering and 6 dead Shadow Corps operatives and 3 extraordinary children had forged in the dark. A weapon shaped like a woman, aimed at the heart of a kingdom that had made the unforgivable mistake of throwing her away. And weapons, once aimed, do not change direction. They arrive. Elyra's Northern Alliance crossed the border into Ashenvale territory on the 14th day of their march south. She had not come alone. Haldra had seen to that. The old commander had stood in the center of Thornhaven the morning after the Shadow Corps' attack, with 5 dead operatives laid out in a row and blood still frozen on the settlement's barricades, and made a speech that lasted exactly 9 sentences. She told her people what had happened, who had sent the killers, why they had come, and then she said the thing that changed the calculus of everything that followed. Ashenvale sent 6 men to murder 3 children in their sleep. If we do nothing, they will send more. I am not interested in spending the rest of my life waiting for the next wave. I am interested in making sure there is no next wave. Anyone who wants to march south with the Queen, gear up. Anyone who wants to stay, no judgment. But understand this. The wall we built here only works if the people behind it are willing to take the fight to the ones trying to tear it down. 43 fighters volunteered. Not the entire settlement. Haldra left a defensive garrison of 20 under Fenn's command, but 43 hardened northern wolves who had survived the frozen wastes and considered a march through enemy territory a lateral move in terms of difficulty. But Haldra did more than rally Thornhaven. She sent riders to the other northern settlements: Iron Hollow, Black Pine, the Ridgeback Commune, a dozen smaller outposts scattered across the frontier like seeds thrown against stone. The message was identical to every camp. Ashenvale is hunting exiles' children. Today it is the Queen's. Tomorrow it could be yours. We march south. Join or do not. They joined. By the time the column crossed into Ashenvale territory, it numbered over 300. Not an army by Southern standards. But 300 northern wolves are not equivalent to 300 southern soldiers. These were people who had been thrown away by kingdoms and rebuilt themselves from nothing. They fought without formation because they did not need formation. They fought with the coordinated ferocity of pack animals who had learned that survival is a team sport and losing is not an option. Elyra rode at the head of the column. The short sword hung at her hip. Her children rode behind her in a supply wagon driven by Marin, who had refused to stay behind despite a head wound that still seeped through its bandage. The old healer had 1 functional eye, 2 steady hands, and a vocabulary of profanity that could strip paint from a barn wall. She was exactly the kind of person you wanted driving your children through hostile territory. Theron found them on the 6th day. The guard captain emerged from the tree line with his 2 soldiers looking like men who had been chewed up by the landscape and spat out roughly. His cloak was shredded. His face was wind-burned raw. His boots were held together by strips of leather torn from his own belt. He stopped 20 yards from the column and stared. He had been sent to find a fugitive queen hiding in a northern settlement. What he found was a marching army led by a woman whose eyes held the particular intensity of someone who has stopped asking for permission and started issuing consequences. "Captain Theron," Elyra said from horseback. Her voice carried no warmth, no hostility either. Just the flat assessment tone of a commander identifying a variable and deciding its value. "My queen." "Do not call me that. Not yet. The title means nothing until I take it back, and I have not taken it back yet. The king sent me to find you." "I know. Your operative friend in the cave mentioned it before I opened his arm." Theron processed that information. His expression did not change, but his posture shifted. The micro-adjustment of a man revising his understanding of the situation in real time. "Velor knows the truth," he said. "About the charges. About Malric. He has been building a case in secret. He wants you to come home." "Home?" Elyra repeated the word with the same iron inflection she had used in the cave. Theron, let me explain something to you. Home is the place that does not try to kill your children. Ashenvale sent 6 assassins to murder my triplets in a cave. That is not home. That is a threat wearing a crown. Malric sent those men, not Valor. Malric operates within Valor's kingdom, uses Valor's resources, commands Valor's soldiers. The distinction between the king's will and the king's failure to control his own court is academic when your children are the ones bleeding. Theron had no answer for that. There was no answer for that. The logic was airtight because it was forged in the furnace of actual experience rather than theoretical politics. "What are your intentions?" he asked. "I am going to the capital. I am going to walk into the Palace of Moons with 300 fighters and 3 children whose blood is more royal than anyone sitting on that council. I am going to remove Malric from power, and then I am going to have a conversation with the Alpha King of Ashenvale about what happens to men who throw their pregnant wives into the snow. And if Valor resists, Valor can resist, cooperate, or step aside. Those are his 3 options. There is no fourth." Theron looked at the column behind her. 300 northern wolves, armed, hard-eyed, the kind of fighters who do not negotiate because negotiation requires the assumption that both parties have something to lose, and these people had already lost everything worth losing. "I would like to ride with you," Theron said, "if you will allow it." "Why?" "Because 5 years ago I escorted you to the gate and said nothing. I have been carrying that silence like a stone ever since. If there is a reckoning coming, I want to be standing on the right side of it." Elyra studied him for a long time, reading him the way Haldra had taught her to read people. Not their words, but their weight, where they carried tension, what their hands did when their mouths were busy being careful. Theron's hands hung at his sides, open, empty, the posture of a man offering himself without conditions. "Fall in behind the supply wagon," she said. "You ride with my children. If anything happens to them, you die first." "Understood." The column reached the outskirts of the capital 8 days later. What they found was a kingdom at war with itself. Malric had not waited for Elyra's arrival. The surviving Shadow Corps operative had delivered her message, every word of it, and the High Regent had responded with the only tool he understood: escalation. In the 12 days since the failed assassination, Malric had executed a soft coup. He had declared a state of emergency based on intelligence reports of a northern invasion force marching toward the capital. He had activated the garrison reserves. He had placed the city under martial law. And he had confined the Alpha King to the Palace of Moons under the pretext of protective custody. The genius of the maneuver was its legitimacy. Every action was technically legal under the emergency powers granted to the High Regent during times of external threat. And Elyra's approaching column was technically an external force, 300 armed fighters from beyond the border, marching on the capital without invitation or authorization. Malric had taken the truth and twisted it just enough to make his response look like patriotism instead of treason. This is the mechanism by which institutional power devours democratic safeguards. Not through dramatic overthrow, through procedure, through the careful exploitation of emergency protocols designed to protect the state, turned instead into tools for capturing it. Every tyrant in history has understood this principle. The coup does not announce itself. It files paperwork. It cites precedent. It wraps itself in the language of security and necessity and the greater good, and by the time the populace realizes what has happened, the locks have already been changed. Valor learned of his confinement when 4 of his own palace guards informed him, with visible discomfort, that the High Regent had restricted his movements to the royal quarters for his own safety. "My own safety," Valor repeated. "Yes, Your Majesty. High Regent Malric has received intelligence of an armed force approaching the capital, standard protective protocols. And if I choose to leave these quarters?" The guards looked at each other. The silence answered the question. Valor stood at the window of his chamber and watched the city below transform into an armed camp. Soldiers at every intersection, barricades across the main thoroughfares. Civilians hurried indoors with the hunched, frightened posture of people who understand that the machinery of the state has shifted from protection to control, and they are no longer citizens, but obstacles. He pressed his palm flat against the glass. His wolf raged inside him, a sustained, violent vibration that rattled his ribs and made his teeth ache. The animal did not understand politics or legal technicalities or the elaborate theater of institutional betrayal. It understood territory, it understood pack, and it understood, with the primal clarity that only instinct provides, that the man who had been whispering in its ear for a decade was the same man who had stolen its mate and was now stealing its throne. The rage that built in Vaelor was not the hot, explosive kind that spends itself quickly and leaves only ash. It was the cold kind, the kind that settles into the marrow and hardens into something structural, the kind that does not need to shout because it has already decided what it is going to do, and shouting would waste energy better spent on execution. There is a moment in the life of every person who has been systematically manipulated when the manipulation becomes visible, not suspected, not theorized, visible. The way a hidden pattern in a carpet becomes obvious once someone points it out, and afterward you cannot unsee it. Vaelor hit that moment standing at his window, watching Malric's soldiers lock down the city he was supposed to rule, and every interaction with the High Regent over the past 10 years reorganized itself in his memory. Every piece of advice that had isolated him from potential allies, every intelligence report that had painted Elyra as a threat, every structural reform that had shifted operational authority away from the throne and toward the High Regent's office. Each piece had seemed reasonable in isolation. Together they formed a blueprint for the systematic capture of a kingdom by a man patient enough to build his cage one bar at a time. He turned from the window. 4 guards. The door was reinforced oak. The corridor beyond led to the main hall, which connected to the throne room, the council chamber, and the eastern gate. 4 guards who had served the crown their entire careers. 4 men who were following orders because the institutional structure they served told them the orders were legitimate. They were not traitors. They were instruments. And instruments can be redirected if you apply the right pressure. "Do you know why the High Regent confined me?" Vaelor asked. The lead guard shifted his weight. "External threat, Your Majesty. Standard protocol. The external threat is my wife, my exiled wife, returning with my children, 3 children who carry the royal bloodline, the same bloodline that Malric has spent 5 years trying to extinguish." The guards exchanged glances. The information hit them the way truth hits people who have been operating inside a lie, not as revelation, but as confirmation. The small wrongnesses they had been ignoring suddenly connected into a pattern that could not be unseen. "I'm going to walk out this door," Vaelor said. "You can stop me. 4 of you, 1 of me. The math works. But before you decide, ask yourselves one question. When this is over, and it will be over, one way or another, within the next 24 hours, which side of history do you want to be standing on? The side that protected a king, or the side that imprisoned one?" The lead guard looked at his 3 companions. Something passed between them. Not words, not signals, but the silent consensus of men who have served together long enough to share a conscience. He stepped aside. Vaelor moved through the palace like a ghost with purpose. He knew every corridor, every service passage, every forgotten stairway that the architects had built for servants, and that kings used when they needed to move without being seen. He collected allies as he went. Guard officers who had served under Theron, administrative staff who had watched Malric's power grow with increasing unease, a handful of council members who had been silenced by threats and were now offered a chance to speak. By the time he reached the eastern wall of the palace, he had 30 men, not enough to match Malric's garrison, but enough to open a gate. Outside the city, Elyra's column had halted at the main road a mile from the outer walls. 300 fighters facing a fortified capital with closed gates and soldiers on every rampart. Haldra rode up beside Elyra and assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a woman who had spent her life calculating the distance between what she had and what she needed. Closed gates, full garrison deployment, crossbow positions on the walls. This is not a city preparing for negotiation. This is a city preparing for siege. "Malric," Elyra said, "obviously. He has turned your homecoming into an invasion. Every soldier on those walls thinks they are defending the kingdom against a northern attack force. They do not know they are protecting a traitor. Then we need to change what they know." "How?" "We are 300 wolves standing in a field. They have walls, numbers, and the institutional authority of the High Regent's emergency decree." Elyra looked at the capital, the city where she had been crowned, the city where she had been condemned, the city that had celebrated her exile and was now preparing to fight her return. It sat on the landscape like a scar, massive stone walls, iron gates, guard towers that bristled with crossbow positions. A fortress built to keep enemies out. But fortresses have a weakness that their builders never anticipate. They are designed against external threats. They are not designed against the threat that is already inside. "We do not need to breach the walls," Elyra said. "We need to open them." "And who exactly is going to open them from inside a city controlled by Malric?" Elyra looked at Theron. The guard captain understood immediately. His face went through a series of micro-expressions: calculation, risk assessment, acceptance, that compressed hours of deliberation into 3 seconds. "There is a service gate on the eastern wall," he said, "built for supply deliveries. Minimal guard presence because it faces away from the main approach. I know the men stationed there. 6 of them served under me before the restructuring. They are Malric soldiers now because everyone is Malric soldier now, but their loyalty was always to the crown, not the office." "Can you get to them?" "I can get to the gate through the drainage channel that runs under the eastern wall. It exits inside the service yard. From there it is 30 yards to the gate mechanism. And if the guards do not cooperate, then I deal with 6 men who used to trust me, and I live with that. But I do not think it will come to that. These men watched the Queen's exile. They watched Malric's rise. They have had 5 years to develop opinions about both. All they need is someone with authority to tell them those opinions are allowed. Go." Theron dismounted, stripped his gear to minimum, a blade, his guard captain's insignia, and the seal ring that identified him as a direct agent of the Alpha King. He looked at Elyra one final time. "When the gate opens, you will have a window. Minutes, not hours. Malric's response time for Eastern Wall breaches is about 12 minutes based on garrison deployment patterns. 12 minutes is enough. For what? For 300 northern wolves to remind this city what real strength looks like." Theron disappeared into the tree line. Elyra watched him go, then turned to Haldra. "Move the column to the eastern approach. Quiet. No torches. When that gate opens, we go through fast, and we do not stop until we reach the palace." "And then?" "And then Malric learns the difference between controlling a kingdom and owning one." Haldra grinned. It was not a pleasant grin. It was the grin of a woman who had spent 22 years waiting for the South to give her a reason to come back, and the South had finally been stupid enough to provide one. The column moved. In the Palace of Moons, Valor reached the throne room and found it empty. The vast obsidian hall that had hosted Elyra's trial was dark, the chandeliers unlit, the silver wolf banners hanging limp in still air. He stood at the center of the room where his wife had stood 5 years ago and felt the weight of every word he had spoken from that throne press down on him like a physical force. "You should not be here, Your Majesty." Malric's voice came from the shadows near the council entrance. The High Regent stepped into the dim light with 4 of his personal guard flanking him. He was dressed in full court regalia, black robes, silver chain of office, the ceremonial dagger at his hip that was supposed to be decorative but that Malric maintained at combat sharpness. "You confined me to my quarters," Valor said, "for your safety. My safety. The way you exiled my wife for her safety. The way you declared a state of emergency for the kingdom's safety. Everything you do is for someone else's safety, Malric. It is remarkable how consistently your concern for others aligns with your own interests. You are upset. I understand. The stress of the current situation. Do not manage me. I am not a crisis to be managed. I am the Alpha King of Ashenvale, and I am standing in my throne room asking the man who stole my wife, my children, and my kingdom to explain himself before I tear the explanation out of him." Malric's composure held. It always held. That was his gift. The ability to remain calm inside the chaos he created. The way the eye of a storm remains still while everything around it is destroyed. Your wife was convicted of treason based on evidence reviewed and approved by the full Crown Council. Evidence you fabricated. I have the proof, Malric. The courier you planted, the accounts you opened under Elyra's seal, the land grant you gave Aldros in exchange for a false medical diagnosis. I have all of it. For the first time, something flickered behind Malric's eyes. Not fear. Recognition. The recognition that the king he had controlled for a decade had been working against him in secret, and that the comfortable architecture of manipulation had developed cracks he had not detected. There is a particular terror that controllers experience when they discover they have been outmaneuvered by someone they considered controllable. It is not the terror of consequences. It is the terror of miscalculation. The realization that the model they built of another person was wrong, that the puppet had thoughts the puppeteer never anticipated, that the machine they constructed contained a gear they did not install. For men like Malric, this is worse than defeat. It is a failure of comprehension, and comprehension is the foundation on which their entire identity rests. Even if what you say is true, Malric said, and his voice remained steady, which was itself a kind of performance. The current situation demands stability. There is an armed force approaching the capital, 300 hostile combatants. Whatever personal grievances exist between us, the kingdom's security takes precedence. Those 300 fighters are led by my wife. They are escorting my children, 3 heirs to the Sacred Alpha line. And you sent assassins to kill them, Malric. 6 Shadow Course operatives dispatched to murder children in a cave. That is not security. That is extermination. I have no knowledge of any such operation. Commander Greaves reports directly to you. The Shadow Corps answers to your office. The operative my wife captured confirmed your standing orders. Would you like me to continue, or would you prefer to stop lying and start negotiating? There is nothing to negotiate. Then we are done talking. Vaelor's wolf surged. The shift was not the controlled, measured transformation of a disciplined alpha. It was the raw, explosive release of 5 years of suppressed rage, channeled through a body that had been built for exactly this kind of violence. The golden eyes blazed. The muscles in his jaw and neck corded. The air around him changed, thickened, pressurized, charged with the pheromonal signature of an alpha wolf asserting dominance over contested territory. Malric's guards drew weapons. Vaelor's 30 men stepped forward from the shadows where they had been positioned during the conversation. The throne room became a chessboard where every piece was armed, and the next move would determine whether the game ended in checkmate or bloodshed. Then the eastern gate opened. The sound reached the palace as a low rumble, distant shouts, the groan of iron hinges, the staccato of hundreds of boots on cobblestone. Malric's head turned toward the sound. His composure cracked. A hairline fracture, visible only to someone watching closely, but as definitive as a fault line in bedrock. That is impossible, he said. That is my wife, Vaelor replied. Elyra's column poured through the eastern gate like water through a broken dam. 300 northern wolves flooding into the capital's streets, moving with the coordinated speed of people who had trained for exactly this kind of rapid urban deployment. They did not attack civilians, they did not damage property. They moved with surgical precision toward the palace, neutralizing Malric's garrison positions not through combat, but through sheer numerical presence and the psychological impact of 300 armed fighters materializing inside walls that were supposed to be impenetrable. And at the head of the column, riding through the city she had been dragged from 5 years ago, Elyra felt the moment the way a wolf feels the shift when the hunt turns. The instant when prey stops running and the predator's body shifts from pursuit to engagement. Every cell in her body was electric. Every sense was amplified. She could hear the shouts from the garrison. She could smell the fear in the soldiers who saw the column coming, and understood that the narrative they had been given, northern invaders, hostile force, defend the walls, was collapsing in real time. The garrison soldiers faced a choice that no amount of training prepares a person for. The choice between following orders and following truth, between institutional loyalty and moral clarity, between the comfortable fiction that their chain of command was legitimate and the visible, undeniable evidence that it was not. Most of them chose truth. Not because they were brave, because the alternative, fighting 300 wolves to protect a high regent who had lied to their king, exiled their queen, and sent assassins to murder children, was a moral position that no one could occupy without losing something essential about themselves. The garrison stood down. Section by section, unit by unit, soldiers lowered weapons and stepped aside as Elyra's column passed. Some saluted, some simply stared. One young officer, barely 20, dropped his sword on the cobblestones and said, loud enough for everyone around him to hear, "That is the Queen!" The word spread through the streets like fire through dry timber. That is the Queen. She is alive. She has children. 3 of them. The queen is back. Elyra reached the palace gates. They were locked. Reinforced oak and iron, the same gates she had been dragged through 5 years ago by guards who would not meet her eyes. She sat on her horse and looked at those gates and felt the full crushing weight of the distance between the woman who had passed through them broken and the woman who now sat before them armed. The gates opened from the inside. Valor stood on the other side. He looked like a man who had been through a war that had not yet ended. His face was drawn. His golden eyes burned with the particular intensity of someone operating on adrenaline and conviction and the absolute refusal to stop until the thing is finished. His knuckles were split. Blood on his sleeve, not his own. He looked at Elyra. She looked at him. 5 years. 5 years of exile, survival, childbirth, frontier labor, assassination attempts, and the slow, grinding reconstruction of a self that had been deliberately demolished. 5 years compressed into a single moment of eye contact between two people who had loved each other, destroyed each other, and were now standing on opposite sides of a threshold that neither could cross without acknowledging what had been lost. Behind Elyra, 300 fighters. Behind Valor, the throne room where Malric waited with his remaining loyalists. Between them, 3 children in a supply wagon who had never seen their father's face. Kaelin stood up in the wagon. His golden eyes locked on Valor with the unnerving intensity of a child who recognizes something he cannot name. Orion sat motionless, watching. Celine gripped Marin's hand and stared with silver eyes that reflected the torchlight like mirrors. Valor's breath stopped. His wolf recognized them before his mind did. The bond was immediate, primal, devastating. A biological recognition that bypassed every cognitive process and hit him in the center of his chest like a physical blow. 3 children. His children. Carrying his bloodline, his eyes, his wolf, and the gifts of a lineage he had almost extinguished through his own blindness. Elyra. His voice broke on her name, not with weakness, with the accumulated pressure of 5 years of regret finally finding an exit. Not now, she said. Her voice was steel. Malric first, everything else after. She dismounted, drew the short sword, walked past the man she had married without touching him, without stopping, without giving him the satisfaction of a reunion that had not yet been earned. Valor fell in beside her, not in front, beside. They walked into the Palace of Moons together, 2 wolves moving in parallel toward a common target, not reconciled, not forgiven, not healed, but aligned, for this single moment, by a shared enemy and the understanding that the man waiting in the throne room had stolen 5 years from both of them and was about to answer for every single day. The throne room doors stood open. Inside, Malric waited with 50 loyalists, the last of his network, the men too deeply implicated in his conspiracy to switch sides, the ones who understood that if Malric fell, they fell with him. They were armed, positioned, desperate. And Malric stood at the center, beside the ancient throne, holding something in his hands that stopped Elyra in her tracks. The Ashenvale relic, the fang of the first wolf. A blade of black crystal that pulsed with a light that was not light, a vibration, a frequency, something that existed at the intersection of physical and ancestral, the concentrated essence of the Sacred Alpha line stored in a weapon that had not been drawn from its vault in 4 centuries. "Do you know what this does?" Malric said. His composure had returned. The mask was back in place, but the desperation beneath it was visible now. A tremor in his voice, a wideness in his pupils, the physiological markers of a man who has been cornered and is reaching for the most extreme option available. The most dangerous moment in any conflict is not when the powerful are winning. It is when they are losing. A man with nothing left to lose and a weapon in his hand is the most unstable element in any equation. He has abandoned calculation. He has abandoned self-preservation. He has entered the territory where consequence no longer matters, and the only remaining impulse is destruction. If I cannot control the outcome, I will ensure there is no outcome for anyone. Malric held the fangs above his head. This relic does not just represent the Alpha line. It contains it. Every drop of ancestral power that flows through the royal bloodline is anchored to this crystal. Destroy it, and the bloodline dies. Not gradually, not over generations, instantly. Every wolf connected to the sacred line loses their power. Your children lose their gifts. The kingdom loses its foundation. Everything collapses. You would destroy the kingdom to save yourself, Elyra said. I would destroy the kingdom to prove a point. That power is not blood. It is not birthright. It is not the accident of which womb you crawled out of. Power is will. Power is architecture. Power is the ability to build systems that outlast the individuals who created them. I built this kingdom's operational infrastructure. I built its intelligence network, its economic framework, its military command structure. Without me, Ashenvale is a name on a map. With me, it is a functioning state. And if you force me to choose between surrendering that work and ending it on my terms, I choose the ending. Miski Smanchen. The fang pulsed. The black crystal vibrated with a frequency that Elyra could feel in her teeth, in her bones, in the deepest cellular structures of a bloodline that connected her to every queen who had ever walked these halls. Beside her, Vaelor staggered. The vibration hit him harder, alpha to alpha, the relic's power resonating with the concentration of sacred blood that flowed through his veins. Behind them, in the supply wagon at the palace gates, 3 children felt it too. Kaelin doubled over. Orion's wolves howled. Celine gasped and pressed her hands over her chest as silver light flickered uncontrollably from her palms. Malric saw the effect. His eyes widened with the terrible exhilaration of a man who has discovered that his final weapon works. He began to bring the fang down against the stone floor of the throne room, and in that fraction of a second between raising and shattering, Elyra moved. She did not reach for the fang. She reached for Malric. The distinction mattered. A person lunging for an object can be redirected, blocked, outmaneuvered. A person lunging for a body is making a commitment that cannot be deflected with geometry. Elyra closed the distance in 3 strides. Not elegant, not trained, just the explosive forward drive of a woman whose children were connected to the thing in that man's hands, and the only way to stop the thing from breaking was to stop the man from swinging. Her shoulder hit Malric's chest. The impact drove him backward. His feet lost traction on the polished obsidian floor, and for one critical second, his grip on the fang shifted from striking position to stabilizing position, the involuntary adjustment of a body trying to stay upright instead of trying to destroy. That second was enough. Vaelor hit him from the side. The Alpha King did not use a weapon. He used his hands, the same hands that had signed Elyra's exile decree, that had gripped the throne while Malric whispered poison into his ear, that had pressed against the window glass of his private chambers while guilt ate him from the inside out. Those hands closed around Malric's wrist, the wrist holding the fang, and twisted with a force that was not measured or strategic, but visceral. Born from the same deep animal fury that had been building pressure behind Vaelor's sternum for 5 years. Malric screamed. The sound was not dignified. It was not the composed protest of a man who maintained his mask even in defeat. It was raw, involuntary. The sound of a body betraying its owner by responding to pain in the most honest way possible. The wrist did not break, but the tendons surrendered. The fang slipped from his fingers and hit the obsidian floor with a sound that rang through the throne room like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. The black crystal did not shatter. It bounced once, rolled, and came to rest against the base of the ancient throne. The vibration that had been building in its core, the frequency that had made Vaelor stagger and the children gasp, dissipated like a wave that had lost its source. The air in the throne room decompressed. Every wolf present felt it simultaneously. A release of pressure so sudden that it registered as dizziness, as if the room had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Malric hit the floor. Vaelor held him there, one knee on the High Regent's chest, both hands pinning his arms. The king's golden eyes were not human in that moment. They were wolf. Pure, undiluted, predatory gold. The face of an alpha asserting dominance over a threat to his pack in the most ancient and unambiguous way his species knew. It is over, Malric. Nothing is over. Kill me and another takes my place. The systems I built do not depend on my survival. They depend on structure. Structure outlasts individuals. Your structure is a house built on forged documents and bribed physicians and 6 dead men in a northern settlement. I have dismantled it. Every file, every financial record, every fabricated communication that you used to condemn my wife. The Crown Council will have the complete evidence within the hour. Malric's head turned. His eyes found Elyra. She stood 5 feet away, breathing hard, the short sword still in her hand, her body coiled in the particular posture of someone who has committed violence and is prepared to commit more. "You should have stayed in the north," he said to her. "You were safe there. Your children were safe. This kingdom will consume you the same way it consumed you before. It did not consume me. You did, and I am still standing, which means either your methods are not as effective as you believe, or you fundamentally misunderstood what you were dealing with." I understood perfectly. A sentimental woman with a bloodline and no power. A mother with 3 children and 30 frontier fighters held off your best operatives in a cave in the dark. Your understanding of power is as fraudulent as the evidence you manufactured. Malric said nothing. The silence was its own kind of confession. The quiet of a man who has run out of narrative, whose story about himself has been contradicted by reality so thoroughly that no revision can save it. There is a moment when every manipulator faces the fundamental flaw in their operating model. They build systems based on the assumption that people are predictable, that incentives can be calculated, behaviors can be modeled, outcomes can be engineered with sufficient data and sufficient leverage. And for years, sometimes decades, this assumption holds. The models work. The predictions prove accurate. The manipulator's confidence in their own understanding of human nature grows until it becomes the foundation of their identity. Then someone does something the model did not predict. A pregnant woman survives the frozen wastes. An exile builds an alliance. A mother fights a trained killer in a cave with a short sword and wins. And the model shatters. And the manipulator discovers that the thing they thought was mastery was actually just a successful run of luck applied to a sample size that was never large enough to capture the full range of what human beings are capable of when they are pushed past the boundaries of the manipulator's imagination. Malric's model had failed, not because it was poorly constructed, because it was built on a fundamental error, the belief that people who have lost everything become weaker. The opposite is true. People who have lost everything become unpredictable, and unpredictability is the only force that no system can defend against. Valor's guards took Malric into custody. They were not gentle. The restraint they had shown for years, the careful deference to the High Regent's authority, the institutional respect for his office, the bureaucratic courtesy that had allowed him to operate with impunity, dissolved the moment the king's knee left his chest. What remained was the raw, honest response of soldiers who had just learned that the man they served had engineered the exile of their queen, the attempted murder of their heirs, and the systematic hollowing out of the throne they had sworn to protect. They dragged him from the throne room the same way guards had dragged Elyra from it 5 years earlier. Through the same doors, past the same obsidian walls, under the same silver banners. The symmetry was not intentional, but it was noticed, by the courtiers who had emerged from their hiding places to watch, by the soldiers who had stood down from Malric's garrison and now lined the corridors with the shell-shocked expressions of men reassembling their understanding of everything they had participated in, and by Elyra, who watched the doors close behind Malric's body and felt something she had not expected. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not the cathartic rush that stories promise when the villain is defeated and justice is served. What she felt was exhaustion. The deep, cellular, bone-level exhaustion of a body and mind that had been running on crisis energy for so long that the absence of crisis felt like falling. The adrenaline drained out of her muscles like water through sand, and what remained was a woman standing in a throne room with a sword in her hand and absolutely no idea what came next. Victory is never what it looks like from the outside. From the outside, it is a moment, a climactic instant when the enemy falls and the hero stands tall and the audience knows that the worst is over. From the inside, it is a threshold, the end of one problem and the beginning of every problem that the first problem was obscuring. The war is over. Now comes the harder work, the work of rebuilding, of reckoning, of facing the damage that cannot be repaired by defeating the person who caused it. Because some damage lives in the body and the memory and the structure of a self that has been broken and rebuilt so many times that the original blueprint no longer exists. Elyra set the sword down on the floor. The clang echoed through the empty hall. Behind her, footsteps. Small ones. 3 sets. She turned. Kaelin stood at the throne room entrance. Orion beside him. Selene behind both brothers, her silver eyes wide, her hands still faintly glowing with residual moonblood energy. Meryn stood behind all 3, one hand on Selene's shoulder, her one good eye scanning the room for threats with the automatic vigilance of someone who had been protecting these children since the day they were born. Baelor saw them. The Alpha King of Ashenvale, standing in his own throne room after retaking his own palace from his own betrayer, stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped being a king, and became, for the first time in his life, simply a man looking at three children who carried his eyes and his blood and the accumulated consequence of every choice he had ever made. Kaelin stared back. The boy did not flinch, did not look away. He stood with the same squared shoulders and locked jaw that Elyra had taught him, the same unflinching directness that she had modeled every day for 5 years by looking at the world without blinking, no matter how hard it hit back. "Who is he?" Kaelin asked. Not to his mother, to the room, to the universe, to the question itself. Elyra looked at Baelor, the man she had married, the man who had exiled her, the man who had wept alone in his study when he found the birth record, the man who had confronted Malric in his own throne room, the man who was now standing 10 feet from his children with tears running down his face and his hands shaking at his sides. "He is your father," Elyra said. 3 words. No context, no explanation, no editorial, just the raw fact, delivered with the blunt precision that 5 years of frontier life had taught her. Say what is true, say it plainly, and let the people who hear it decide what to do with the information. Kaelin processed the word. Father. A concept he understood abstractly. Haldra's settlement had fathers. Other children had fathers. The word existed in his vocabulary the way distant geography exists on a map. Real but remote. Theoretical. The boy looked at Baelor, studied him, read him the way Elyra had taught him to read opponents. Not the surface, but the structure. The weight. The balance. The truth that the body tells when the mouth is closed. "You hurt my mother," Kaelin said. Baelor flinched. The words hit him harder than any blade could have, because they were spoken without anger, without accusation, with the simple, devastating factuality of a child stating something he knows to be true in the same tone he would use to describe weather. "Yes," Baelor said. "I did." Why? The question was a knife. Clean, direct, unanswerable in any way that would satisfy the moral architecture of a 5-year-old who had been raised by a woman who taught him that honesty is not optional and excuses are not explanations. Baelor looked at his son, looked at the golden eyes that mirrored his own, looked at the jaw that carried Elyra's stubbornness and the posture that carried her strength and the expression that carried her absolute refusal to accept anything less than the truth. "Because I was afraid," Baelor said. "Because a man I trusted told me lies, and I believed them because believing them was easier than questioning them. Because I was the most powerful person in the kingdom, and I was still too weak to trust the woman I loved over the advisor who controlled my information. I was a coward, Kaelin. That is the honest answer. I was a coward, and your mother paid for my cowardice, and you and your brother and your sister paid for it. And nothing I say or do will undo the 5 years I stole from all of you." The throne room was silent. 300 years of royal history looked down from the portraits on the walls. Silver wolf banners hung motionless. The fang of the first wolf lay on the floor like a discarded argument, and a king knelt before his own children and told them the truth about himself without flinching, which was the first genuinely brave thing he had done in 5 years. Courage is not the absence of fear, and it is not the performance of strength. It is the willingness to be seen as you actually are, broken, wrong, insufficient, by the people whose opinion you cannot afford to lose. Every crown in history has been used as a mask. Every throne has been used as a hiding place. The rarest act a powerful man can perform is to step out from behind his own authority and stand in the open where his failures are visible and his justifications are useless, and the only thing between him and contempt is the honesty of his confession. Baelor knelt on the obsidian floor and looked up at 3 children he had never held, and for the first time in his reign, the Alpha King of Ashenvale was not performing. He was present. Celine moved first. The girl crossed the distance between the entrance and the kneeling king with the unself-conscious directness of a child who feels something and responds to it without the interference of strategy or self-protection. She stopped in front of Baelor, looked at his face with her silver eyes, and placed one small hand flat against his chest. He felt the warmth immediately. Not the aggressive heat of her combat manifestation in the cave. Something different. Something that moved through his ribs and into the tight, clenched space behind his sternum, where 5 years of guilt had compressed itself into a knot of scar tissue so dense it had become part of his anatomy. The warmth found that knot, did not dissolve it, did not heal it, acknowledged it. The Moonblood gift was not just physical, it was empathic. It sensed the wound beneath the wound, the psychic damage that no physician could diagnose and no decree could repair. "You are hurting," Celine said. "You have been hurting for a long time." Baelor's composure broke, not dramatically, quietly. The way a dam breaks when the water finds the crack it has been working on for years, a slow, inevitable surrender to a force that was always stronger than the structure trying to contain it. "Yes," he said. Elyra watched this from 10 feet away. Her arms were crossed. Her face was stone, but her eyes were not. Her eyes held the complex, layered, contradictory emotional landscape of a woman watching the man who destroyed her life kneel before the children he never knew and tell them the truth without deflection. Part of her wanted to pull Celine back. Part of her wanted to walk away. Part of her, the part she would not acknowledge for weeks, the part buried so deep beneath anger and survival and the deliberate construction of independence that it required an archaeologist's patience to excavate, felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. It takes months, years. Sometimes it never fully arrives, and the best a person can achieve is a kind of functional truce with their own pain. What shifted in Elyra was something smaller and more fundamental. The recognition that the man kneeling on the floor was not the same man who had sat on the throne 5 years ago and refused to look at her. People change. Not easily, not completely, not in the dramatic, cinematic way that stories prefer, where a single revelation transforms a villain into a saint and the audience goes home satisfied. Real change is ugly. It is incremental. It requires the sustained, exhausting work of examining every assumption, questioning every reflex, rebuilding every response pattern that contributed to the original failure. It is not glamorous. It is not guaranteed. And it is not sufficient on its own. A changed person still owes a debt to the people they harmed before the change, and that debt does not disappear because the debtor is now a better version of themselves. But the change is real, and denying its reality because the pain is still present is not strength. It is a different kind of prison. "Stand up," Elyra said. Baelor stood. His eyes were red. His face was wet. His hands hung at his sides with the helpless openness of a man who has nothing left to perform and nothing left to hide behind. "I am not going to forgive you today," Elyra said. "I may not forgive you this year. I may not forgive you ever. What you did, what you allowed to be done, cost me 5 years of my life. 5 years of raising our children alone. 5 years of chopping wood and killing game and sleeping on packed earth while you sat in a palace drowning in guilt that you chose over action. That is not something a speech fixes. That is not something kneeling fixes. That is something that gets rebuilt over time, if it gets rebuilt at all, and I am the one who decides the timeline. Not you, not the court, not the kingdom's need for a convenient reconciliation narrative. Me. I understand. I am going to stay in Ashenvale, not for you, for them." She indicated the children. They deserve to know where they come from. They deserve access to their bloodline, their history, their inheritance. Celine needs moonblood training that no frontier healer can provide. Orion's wolf authority needs to develop within a pack structure, not in isolation. Kaelin needs to learn what he is before someone tries to use what he is against him. Whatever you need, whatever they need. I need you to listen, Baelor. Actually listen, not the way you listen to Malric, filtered through ego and fear and the assumption that the person talking to you has an agenda. Listen the way you should have listened 5 years ago when I stood in this room and told you I was carrying your children and you chose a forged report over the woman standing in front of you. I will. We will see. That was the terms. Not a reconciliation, not a reunion, a provisional arrangement built on the thinnest possible foundation. The shared biological fact of 3 children and the mutual understanding that those children's needs superseded the wreckage of their parents' history. It was not romantic, it was not satisfying in the way that stories train their audiences to expect. It was honest. And honesty, in the aftermath of systematic dishonesty, is the only material strong enough to build on. The days that followed were a controlled demolition of everything Malric had built. The Crown Council received the evidence. Every forged document, every bribed witness, every financial trail that connected the High Regent's office to the fabrication of Elyra's charges. The council members who had participated in the original trial sat in their chairs and absorbed the information with the particular stillness of people who are simultaneously processing guilt, relief, and the desperate hope that their complicity will be attributed to ignorance rather than cowardice. Malric was tried. Not in the Obsidian throne room. Elyra refused to allow it. The trial was held in the open courtyard under daylight, where every citizen who wanted to watch could watch. No closed doors, no sealed proceedings, no institutional mechanisms that could be manipulated by men who understood how to work the system better than the system understood itself. He was found guilty of fabricating evidence against the Queen, guilty of conspiracy against the Sacred Alpha line, guilty of ordering the assassination of royal heirs, guilty of executing a soft coup against the Alpha King under the cover of emergency authority. He did not beg. He did not confess. He stood in the courtyard with his wrists bound and his black robe stripped and his silver chain of office removed, and he looked at the crowd with the expression of a man who believes, even in defeat, that he was the most competent person in the room. The expression did not waver when the sentence was read. Permanent exile, beyond the frozen wastes, the same sentence he had engineered for Elyra 5 years earlier. The symmetry was not accidental. Elyra had insisted on it, not as cruelty, as education. Let the man who designed exile as a punishment experience exile as a reality. Let him learn what it feels like to walk north into white nothing with no gold, no weapons, and no network. Let the wastes teach him what they taught her, that the systems he built were not power. They were scaffolding, and scaffolding removed from the building it supports is just sticks. The kingdom healed slowly. Not the dramatic, instantaneous restoration that prophecies promise and reality never delivers. Slowly. The way a broken bone heals, through the boring, painful, unglamorous process of immobilization, calcium deposit, gradual remodeling. The crops did not surge overnight. The wolves did not regain their strength in a week. The Sacred Alpha line did not roar back to full power because the triplets existed. What happened was quieter, more fundamental. The kingdom began to trust itself again. The institutional rot that Malric had cultivated, the culture of fear, the assumption of surveillance, the reflexive obedience to authority regardless of its legitimacy, eroded as the truth of his conspiracy spread through every level of society. People who had been silent began to speak. Officials who had been compliant began to question. The muscle memory of civic courage, atrophied by a decade of manipulation, began to rebuild through the simple, repetitive exercise of honesty. The triplets were formally recognized as royal heirs in a ceremony that Elyra insisted be kept simple. No silver banners, no crystal chandeliers, no 300 courtiers in pressed cloaks performing loyalty, a small gathering. Haldra was there. She had refused to return north until she saw the thing through, and she stood at the back of the hall with her arms crossed and her iron gray hair pulled back, and an expression that dared anyone to make the ceremony longer than it needed to be. Merrin was there. One eye, 2 steady hands. She had agreed to stay in the capital to help train Celine in the Moonblood arts, on the condition that the palace provide her with a room that had a fireplace, a supply of northern spirits, and a door she could lock against what she called the insufferable politeness of southern wolves. Kaelin stood straight during the ceremony. Orion stood still. Celine fidgeted until Merrin put a hand on her shoulder. Elyra watched her children receive the titles that should have been theirs from birth. Prince Kaelin, Prince Orion, Princess Celine. 3 names added to the royal record. 3 heartbeats entered into the lineage of a kingdom that had tried to erase them before they drew their first breath. She did not cry. She had done her crying in a cave in the frozen north, in the dark, alone, with 3 newborns pressed against her chest and the sound of wind erasing every trace of the world she had lost. That crying was done. What replaced it was something harder and more durable than tears. The satisfaction of a woman who had taken the worst thing the world could throw at her and turned it into the best thing the world had ever seen. Months passed. The palace changed. Not its architecture, its atmosphere. Laughter echoed through hallways that had been silent with fear for a decade. Children ran through gardens that had been manicured into sterile perfection and turned them into the productive mess that children always create when adults are wise enough to let them. Kalen trained with the palace guard and embarrassed soldiers twice his age with instincts that Elyra had sharpened on the frozen frontier. Orion spent his days with the kingdom's wolf packs, building connections that the old bloodline masters said should have been impossible for a child his age, but that Orion accomplished with the quiet, effortless authority of a boy who had been speaking wolf since before he could speak human. Celine studied with Marin and the palace healers, learning to channel the moonblood gift with precision instead of instinct, and by the end of the first year, she could heal wounds that would have required a full healer circle to address. Vaelor and Elyra did not reconcile quickly. They did not fall back into each other's arms with the convenient emotional acceleration that narratives prefer. They rebuilt, slowly, awkwardly. Through 1,000 small interactions, shared meals that started in silence and gradually admitted conversation, joint decisions about the children's education that required them to be in the same room and listen to each other, late evenings on the palace terrace, where neither spoke and both were present, and the simple act of occupying the same space without conflict became its own kind of progress. Forgiveness, when it came, did not announce itself. It did not arrive as a dramatic declaration or a tearful embrace. It arrived the way dawn arrives, gradually, imperceptibly, through the slow accumulation of light that transforms the world without any single moment being identifiable as the turning point. One morning, Elyra realized she had stopped flinching when Vaelor entered a room. One evening, she noticed that the anger she had been carrying like a weapon had shifted into something less sharp, not gone, transformed. Alloyed with understanding and the grudging acknowledgement that the man who had failed her was doing the work of deserving her, day by day, without demanding credit for it. It was not a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales require the erasure of damage, and damage cannot be erased. It can only be integrated, woven into the fabric of a life that continues forward despite the tears in its history. Elyra and Vaelor would carry the scars of what happened in the throne room for the rest of their lives. But scars, unlike wounds, do not bleed. They are evidence of healing, not evidence of injury. And the choice to heal together rather than apart was not weakness. It was the hardest kind of strength, the strength to remain vulnerable to the person who hurt you, because the alternative is a life defined by the protection of wounds that will never close if they are never exposed to air. On a morning in late spring, Elyra stood on the eastern terrace of the Palace of Moons and watched the sun rise over a kingdom she had been dragged from in chains and returned to in armor. The city spread below her like a living thing, smoke from breakfast fires, the sound of market vendors setting up their stalls, the distant bark of wolves running patrol on the outer walls. A kingdom waking up, a kingdom that had been sick for a long time and was finally, slowly, learning what health felt like. 3 children burst through the terrace door behind her, arguing about something trivial with the passionate intensity that only children can generate. Kalen wanted to train with the guard. Orion wanted to work with the new wolf recruits. Celine wanted to practice a healing technique that Marin had shown her the previous day. All 3 wanted to go first. None of them were willing to yield. Elyra did not intervene. She listened to them argue and felt, beneath the noise and the chaos and the absolute refusal of any of her children to compromise, the things she had built in the frozen north. Not a throne, not a title, not the political machinery of a kingdom, a family. The irreducible, indestructible, stubbornly alive thing that no exile can erase and no conspiracy can fabricate, and no king can decree into or out of existence. Vaelor appeared at the terrace door. He leaned against the frame and watched his children argue and did not try to resolve it. He had learned that much, that not every conflict requires a king's intervention, that sometimes the best thing a father can do is stand in the doorway and let his children be loud and difficult and gloriously, defiantly alive. His eyes met Elyra's over the heads of 3 arguing children. She did not smile, but the stone in her expression had cracked enough to let something through. Not warmth exactly, but the possibility of warmth. The architectural foundation on which warmth could eventually be built, if both of them continued the work day after day. without guarantee and without the convenient certainty that stories promise, but life never delivers. It was enough, not perfect, not complete, not the triumphant resolution that wipes the slate clean and sends the audience home, believing that all wounds heal and all villains fall and all families reunite in golden light. It was real. And real in a world full of manufactured narratives and engineered outcomes, and the relentless pressure to perform happiness instead of earning it was worth more than any throne. The sun climbed higher, the children kept arguing, and the queen who had survived the frozen wastes delivered triplets in a timber lodge, fought an assassin in a cave, led an army through a kingdom, and brought a tyrant to justice, stood on a terrace in the morning light, and watched the future she had built with her own hands take its first steps into a world that was finally, imperfectly, enough.